Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council meeting. Today is Thursday, February 29th, and we are actually broadcasting live from the Gene Harvey Community Center in the beautiful town of Walnut Grove, California. If you will please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. What? Emma, will you lead us in roll call, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. I will begin with roll call of all of the council members in person. Councilmember Burgess.
Here.
Councilmember Damrell. Councilmember Hueso. Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Moranian.
Here.
Chair Madueño.
Here.
And I will now do roll call of our remote council members. Councilmember Zingali.
Yes.
And do you have any individual over the age of 18 with you in the room?
No, I do not.
Thank you.
Hello, Daniel.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Okay, we will now move on to our next item. That is our public comment. This item is for the public to comment on any topic not on the council agenda. Any topics on the
Madam
agenda
Chair.
that will be taken. Yes.
Madam Chair, we have a member of the Historical Society here to speak with us and welcome us to the building.
Oh.
Mary Ellen Burns.
Well,
come
then
up
by
and
all
give
means.
a little welcome.
Welcome. Or should we say, you're welcoming us because we're in your town.
Well, I was actually going to thank you very much for inviting me today so I could share a little bit of the story of the Sacramento River Delta Historical Society by way of my own story. So I first came to the Delta when I was about 10 years old. We lived in the projects off of Broadway, where most of the people who lived there were either cannery workers or would go to the labor halls every day so that they could come down to the Delta as farm workers. My father wanted to get some fresh fruit, which we couldn't afford to buy in a grocery store, so we did a U-Picket. We came down the river road, and I was immediately excited by, one, how long it took. We didn't have Highway 5 then, but the old farmsteads, the men and women working in the fields, the tractors and other agricultural equipment that you found, the rolling of water was quite wonderful, especially watching the workers who would work so fast, going fast from side to side, actually picking fruit and stacking them. All the time, my father explaining to me how they were being exploited, and I maybe should rethink a little bit of the history of that place. Suffice it to say, half an hour later, my father had fallen out of a ladder. I'd gotten stung by a bee. And my mother had to race us back on the river without a license because she really didn't know how to drive to a hospital. So to me, the Delta was always a place of pain and fear. And it wasn't until some years later that I was invited back by a friend of mine in college, Naomi Sakai, whose family grew up here, that I really started to get a sense of the wonder and the importance of the Delta region. It was also hard for me contextually to understand her story. Her family came over in the late 1800s with that of her stories of her family being interned in Tule Lake and some of the issues that surrounded the Asians, especially in this community. And then to finally go to Al the Wops, which we had planned on going to. My father would never have used that moniker on that first visit. And to hear people tell stories of prostitution and gambling and also heroism, because so many of the young men at that time, while I was protesting the war, were actually signing up to go to the war. A few years later, I ended up getting a job doing jobs programs down in the Delta and worked here a lot, eventually working in politics with a lot of the politicians. I really didn't get a sense of the history of the place, however, until I got a phone call from somebody in Italy asking if I could host a woman who wanted to do her master's thesis on the Chinese of Locke. And Locke at that time only had a few Chinese left, but the city literally put out the welcome wagon for her. They allowed us both to stay for 2 weeks and then started to share their stories. I was always a bit of a oral historian, and I turned on my tape recorder and started recording them. When I first heard about, this is almost the same time that I heard about the Sacramento River Delta Historical Society, which had just begun, 1977. They had taken a look at the Deloy gambling hall, decided to turn that into a museum, and then along the way grew more and more to gather oral histories, to start a resource center, a regular newsletter, and then 6 programs a year that looked at the history and some contemporary issues of the Delta. Uh, Somewhere I got roped into being the president. I don't know how, but that kind of happens at a time when the pandemic was going and everything slowed down a little bit. So like everyone else, we've regrouped and rethought how are we going to do what we do, which is basically to preserve and promote the story, preserve the stories of the Delta, everyone who lived here, both the bitter and the better, the images and the artifacts, and also promote this particular history. So we have some new initiatives. One is called Voices of the Delta. We took the old oral histories so that we could collect stories like the personal narrative that I just told you. It's not just where people were born, but what were their experiences and all the stories of the people who didn't live here, but maybe worked here or grew up here or like me was a visitor. We've also instituted something called the Delta, which is a new awards program specifically to be able to honor and celebrate the individuals, businesses, maybe even an industry or space that contributed so much to the vital story of the Sacramento Delta. Our first recipient is Justy's Place, Mark Moraes and the Moraes family. We have an event that will not only honor them, but tell their story at the Ride Hotel on Saturday, April 27th. We have flyers here if you need to know more. But what we'll do with that process as well is to sit down with the family and really capture the history. We're also now starting to do a monthly bulletin instead of just a regular newsletter. And that bulletin will be in collaboration with other groups in the area so that we can all start to tell people what our events are and start to share. And a new history journal called Delta Stories. And that will be an up to 100-page journal every year that will have essays and articles, book reviews, and will not only reprint some of the materials that we have in the oral histories we've taken, but do new stories as well. And I'm hoping that people here will want to contribute to it. And we've also started some real partnerships with libraries and archives and museums specifically on how to do neighborhood, community, and family research. Our first one is in participation with the Sacramento History Museum. It's a 4-part series that starts March 9th, and eventually that will move into the libraries down here in the Delta. And that's a little bit of our story. We really encourage you to join us and to know more, as much as we also want to know more about you and to make sure that we share your stories on our website and in our journal. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. I actually grabbed a copy of your newsletter, and just to hear your enthusiasm tells me this, even though you came here a little bit later, this is home. This is what you've always known as home. And it's incredible to hear how much you've done, how much you're doing, again, to celebrate, to promote, and to preserve the way of life, if you will, for here in the Delta. So thank you so much for indulging us. We really appreciate that. And we will take you up on your offer. I can assure you. Thank you again. Okay, now we will move on to our next item. And that is, again, item 3, public comment. This item, again, is for the public to comment on any topic not on today's council agenda. Any comments on the items on the agenda will be taken during that time. Emma?
If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment on any agenda item during today's meeting, please send an email blue card to engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov as seen on the screen. Be sure to note your name and the agenda item that you wish to speak on. When called, the clerk will unmute you. And Madam Chair, we do have a public comment today. Justin March, you are able to come up and speak.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for having me here today. It's an impromptu session for me, but I'm here to share with you a project that I am helping to cultivate through the University of California. It's a multi-research initiative, so it's housed through UC Berkeley, UC Davis, UC Merced, and UC San Diego. The project is called Just Transitions in Large Socio-Ecological Systems. We're referring to the Delta in that sense. It's kind of a mouthful right now. We're working on the title. But what I want to do today is plug this research project. Our goal here is to work with a variety of contributors, stakeholders, stewards, any folks in the Delta among various backgrounds that want to contribute their perspective on future management strategies in regards specifically to salinity. That's the goal of our project, is to cultivate information from folks and then to generate a series of scenarios. So our project is situated around future speculation on what management strategies we want to utilize within the Delta based on what all the stakeholders, contributors, constituents, and stewards have to say about it. This is a 4-year project. We're just sort of getting off the ground now, and one of the goals is to just sort of build awareness of the project. So again, thank you for having this time today to speak on behalf of it. What I would love to have happen is any folks that have time, review our website or speak with me after this meeting. I would love to share more about it, but we're in the early stages of cultivating outreach. And so any sort of champions of various community groups, I would love to hear from you, including folks behind me. It's sort of a complex project, but I'd be happy to share more later, and I don't want to take up too much more time here today. But again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It sounds like a very worthwhile and exciting project. And you say you're just kicking this off.
Technically, we're through year 1 of the project, so that began with sort of an academic literature review and kind of setting the scope of the project, but it is a 4-year project. So over the next 3 years, we will be setting up public workshops. We are setting our first public workshop here in Delta, June of this year, so it's coming up very soon. And it's sort of a cycle. It's a process in which we're convening publics to discuss future scenarios. Essentially, what if we did this? What if we pulled this lever and changed ecological conditions? What if we pulled this lever and changed policy? What if we pulled this lever and accelerated or decelerated infrastructure? So very hypothetical, very exploratory, but aimed at getting everyone together, everyone having a seat at the table and discussing what will a future Delta look like and what do you want that to be? And through that process, hopefully an outcome is that we've created a suite of scenarios, that must be time, in which we can sort of reverse engineer management strategies to achieve those future goals.
Excellent. Well, if we don't have your contact information, I can assure you, we now have it, but we have a staff and a team that I'm sure are going to reach out to you, because I think that there's lots that we can hopefully collaborate and partner with you on this. So congratulations. This is very exciting.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Justin, how can people contact you?
There is a QR code on the back of the brochure, which will land you on our website. There's also an email address located at the bottom.
How about for the people who are listening at home?
People at home, good question. We intend to have a phone number set up very soon. In the meantime, you'll go to our website, which is Delta Just Transitions. .ucdavis. I should know this, arcgis.com, I believe.
Okay.
Actually, yes.
Probably have it there.
It's, yeah. So it's, I thought it was a dash, but it's Delta dash just dash transitions. Is that correct? Dash UC Davis dot hub dot arcgis.com. That's a long one.
It is a tough
No
one.
wonder you
We're
didn't
working on that as
remember.
well.
Madam Chair, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, you talked about, in this leaflet, you talk about how you democratize science. Is the data that you already have available at the academia that is going to be used, or do you still do data collection through these workshops? I mean, what is that we offer besides what everybody thinks, right? I mean, people have ideas, wishes, how they want to see the development. But when we talk about science and you mentioned like, bring science to decision, is it science that you already have in academia?
I would say there are proxies for some of the scenarios that we're wishing to construct. And so if I'm answering your question correctly, yes, we're utilizing folks in hydrodynamics, in ecology, social scientists. So it's a very broad interdisciplinary team. They will sort of vet the scenarios that are constructed with publics. So the publics, what we're intending to intake as data at first is people's perceptions and people's priorities within the Delta. And to aggregate that information, to workshop it with publics, and then the outputs of that are data modeling through various rigorous software utilized by academic specialists. And then bringing that information back, this is what you told us we should be thinking about and looking at, and this is what that could look like based on hard science or, state-of-the-art technology. And over the next 2 or 3 years, recycle that process to refine it.
Yes, absolutely.
In Contra Costa County, we're working on sea level rise, and we're working with BCDC and the Delta Stewardship. We'll have Delta Adapt coming. We're talking about sea level rise, and then we talk about salinity and saltwater intrusion and all those things. And it's a very unique kind of place where it all kind of comes together. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. There's a lot of vulnerable communities in those areas that we're talking about. So just wanted to throw that idea out to you to explore.
Any information you have on stakeholder groups or communities, specifically communities that are impacted within the Delta, is one of our main priorities right now.
Okay. Reach out to my office and we'll connect you. Thanks.
Josh, I told you, you're not going to walk away without having a good amount of information and exchange of resources. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming and addressing us.
And just a reminder for the council members, this is a project that, as I understand, was spearheaded by our former lead scientist, Laurel Larson. And so we are coordinating through our salinity management workshop series with Justin's team.
Excellent. Okay. We will now move on to the consent calendar, item 4. Are there any public comments at this time on the public comment period for consent calendar? Can anybody tell that I have like a fog?
There are no public comments on the consent calendar, Madam Chair.
Members, is there a need for any discussion on any items on the consent calendar? Or is there a motion to accept the consent calendar as noted? Been moved by Councilmember Wisdom
I'll second.
and a second by Councilmember Moranian. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Burgess.
Yes.
Councilmember Damrell. Councilmember Weissoap. Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Councilmember Moranian.
Aye.
Councilmember Zingali.
Aye.
Chairman Dueño.
Aye. We will now move on to item 5, and I'm going to make this really brief. It's the chair's report. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight. More specifically was a tribal summit that I had the opportunity to attend earlier this week. It was actually on Monday. And in listening to some of the speakers and in hearing the information and the dialogue going back and forth, but mostly, obviously, it was from the Native American community, the tribal leaders, it really cemented for me that we as a council should always take a look at how we can best approach our tribal community to make sure that they are fully engaged in any and every aspect of our work. And as we take a look at our EJ white paper that should be coming out later, probably April, May, I guess that's what I'm starting to see. Are we really doing the very, very best that we can to make sure that our tribal communities are fully engaged? Are they fully being consulted with? The more that I look at, again, the need for that collaboration, but I also take a look at how our Native communities have somewhat been discounted in the past for not lack of trying, but I think the Native community, the Native American community, the tribal communities are really looking for all of us to, again, make sure that we're reaching out in the most effective way, that we really are not just checking the box, but that we're really there, present, and asking them to be part of any and all of our work. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight. Again, it was very, very well attended. The governor came and spoke, and actually, he didn't speak. The tribal leaders themselves wanted him to listen to what they had to say. Obviously, as state agencies, we were all present and listening again to their core group of priorities that they continue to stress are not being fully addressed or met by the state of California. Housing, there was a lot on mental health, a lot on, again, the disparities affecting the Native American community. And from our perspective, again, it's, are we getting them fully engaged on nature-based solutions? So I just walked away with, again, a renewed sense of, are we doing more and can we do better? And so that's my challenge to myself. I really do need to do a lot better in terms of more engagement, meaningful engagement. We were going to get an update on the next Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, but I understand Amanda Bowles is out. Is that correct? Oh, Nina, will you be giving an update?
100%.
Excellent. So we now have Mina. I want to say your name again. Minachi, and your last name is Odiliapan. Say it correctly for me so that I can. There you go.
Minachi Odeyapan. If it's easier, feel free to address me as Mina. It is personal preference. I don't mind.
Okay.
But yes, I'll be presenting the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Act DPIC updates today. But anyway, good afternoon, council members, and I'm excited to say DPIC has been very busy, and we're very excited for the events we have upcoming for you guys in March and April. Next slide. Oh. Next slide, please. Could we switch to the next slide?
There we go.
Thank you. So DPIC currently has two active subcommittees coming up, convening both in March. The first one being the Restoration Subcommittee, which will be convening on March 7th at the CNRA building in Sacramento. The primary focus for the subcommittee will be on invasive aquatic weeds, but more specifically, the impacts, risks, and management of invasive aquatic vegetation in tidal wetland restoration projects. Staff from the Delta Stewardship Council, the Department of Water Resources, Department of Parks and Recreation, and Division of Boating and Waterways have come together to present and discuss the various challenges, successes, and adaptive management needs associated with invasive aquatic vegetation. I also want to say a huge thank you to the staff who made this possible. So we have Dylan Chappell, Elizabeth Brusati, and Annie Moret, and our last day, Friday, Sea Grant Fellow Charnel Wycliffe, who did a great job in coordinating this with the help of Delta Conservancy staff member with Rachel Wigginton. And I also want to direct you to the picture on the slide, which is from last year's Restoration Forum at the Ride Hotel. And this forum was an open forum, which allowed participants to meet and ask questions of the various project presenters at the forum. Next slide, please. And then following that, we are very excited for our second subcommittee, which is the Delta Agency Science Work Group, which after a very long break will be convening on March 19th at the CNRA building with a focus on cyanobacteria, harmful algal blooms. So many DPIC agencies are participating in this meeting, just showcasing how important collaboration and coordination are to this issue and addressing such a challenging issue. So we have staff from the council, DWR, and Environmental Science Associates who will be presenting the draft strategy at the meeting. And the council was asked to develop this by the State Water Board. The meeting is targeted toward DPIC science leads and will discuss the various aspects of the draft strategy. And we hope to gain feedback from this meeting that allows us to improve on it and create a final version of it that's ready for DPIC in April. The staff leads on this are Tricia Lee and Rachel Kloffenstein and Sea Grant Fellow Alex Stella. And I also want to say a huge thank you to our lead scientist, Dr. Lisa Marie Winda Myers, for agreeing to facilitate this meeting. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we're very busy for DPIC. Our DPIC Spring Gathering will be on April 15th in downtown Stockton. And while we're still finalizing the agenda, the tentative agenda will be on environmental justice. We're going to have a few site tours in Stockton, and we hope these site tours really showcase to DPIC agencies the importance of the environmental justice perspective in their work. And during this meeting, we are also anticipating to discuss the CHAB's monitoring strategy and updates on the restoration subcommittee's work. And with DPIC would not be possible to all the staff working on it, especially the Office of Public Participation staff, Beck Barger, Erica, and Emma Askey for all the help they provided in this. And before I end this presentation, I wanted to draw your attention to this really cool DPIC visual we have. This was made by the Council's communications team, and it shows how interconnected the DPIC agencies, the subcommittees, and the co-equal goals are. And this graphic is available on the Council website. And with that, I will end this presentation. Open to any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Minaji. Are there any questions? I'll just add a couple of side notes on the items. It's great to see the collaboration and continued collaboration work between ourselves and all of these agencies. I know that the Restoration Subcommittee, looking forward to what they're going to be presenting with regard to the invasive aquatic weeds. I just had a brief discussion, and I've been playing phone tag with the Division of Boating and Waterways, Ramona Hernandez, because we really want and hope to get the Parks Department to come on board as another one of our agencies that are going to be represented on DPIC. So hopefully having more conversations and letting them know that they're welcome and actually much needed on this, serving on DPIC. Glad to hear that the Delta Agency Science Work Group is coming out of the hiatus. This is new for me, but not new to the work that we're doing or to DPIC in general. So really excited to hear more about what is going to be coming out of. And Lisa Marie, thank you for taking the lead role on facilitating this. And as Mina mentioned, our DPIC meeting is actually scheduled for April 15th. It will be held in Stockton. EJ continues to be top of mind for all state agencies. And so I think, and federal agencies for that matter, Stockton really does promote an opportunity for us to be able to meet with some key leaders that are carrying the torch with regard to environmental justice issues. Unfortunately, we are not, doesn't look like we're going to be able to meet at the Lindley House, which I was excited that was going to be a location for us. So a lot of history there. It was actually owned by a naval officer many decades ago. And so it's known as the Lindley House. Great location right there at the Port of Stockton, but unfortunately, I think it's going to be a little too small. So we're looking at other potential prospects. But EJ, again, continues to be front and center for all of us. And again, kudos to our communications department for a great graphic. If that tells you anything, again, all the work, all the agencies that have, again, their hands on everything and anything associated with our co-equal goals. So Mina, again, thank you so much for providing the update. Is there any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Excellent. We will now move on then to item 6. That is our executive officer's report. And for that, we have our esteemed executive officer, Miss Jessica Pearson.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here in Walnut Grove for our February and tomorrow our March meetings. Today, we'll be conducting our regular business meeting, and tomorrow will be a focused discussion on Delta Adapts, our climate adaptation work that we're doing. So council staff tomorrow will present draft strategies and actions and engage with the public in conversation on the topics. So if anyone watching this would like to attend tomorrow, or if you're already planning to attend but you have not registered, we highly encourage you to do so on our website. There has been one new covered action certification since our last meeting. On February 9th, the Department of Water Resources filed a certification of consistency for a tidal habitat restoration project located on Chips Island, a historically managed wetland for seasonal duck hunting, which is in the southeastern edge of the Sassoon Marsh. The Delta Plan designates the Sassoon Marsh, including Chips Island, as a priority habitat restoration area. Chips Island is a 900-acre property in Solano County. It's in the southeastern part of the marsh, and it's composed of 3 separate parcels. So the public review period of that certification is open through March 11th, 2024. And more details are available on our website under the Covered Actions tab. I'll highlight a couple of comment letters for you. On January 29th, council staff submitted a comment letter to Reclamation District 1601. This is on the notice of intent to adopt a mitigated negative declaration for Twitchell Island Wetland Enhancement and Restoration Project. Based on the project location and the scope, the project appears to meet the definition of a covered action. So in the letter, the council invites RD 1601 to engage with staff in early consultation, and we outline that we are available to discuss the matters raised in the letter as they proceed to their next stages of project approval. Also on February 9th, the council sent a letter to the city of Pittsburgh in regards to their draft environmental impact report for their general plan 2040 update. The letter outlines the Delta Plan regulatory policies that could apply to this project, and we invite city staff to engage with us in consultation. The council welcomed a new 2024 California Sea Grant Fellow, Dane Wicker, to the Planning and Performance Division. Dane has an undergraduate degree in biology and a master's degree in marine conservation and biodiversity. Dane will be working on projects related to communications and outreach, assisting us with our Science for Communities effort, and other projects related to our Delta Plan performance measures. The outreach highlights report and the active projects lists are available in your packet and online for the public. We do not have a legal update today, but I am going to invite Brandon Chapin up, our legislative and policy advisor, who is going to do double duty in presenting a legislative update and also a tribal engagement update. Welcome, Brandon.
Thanks, Jessica, and good morning, Chair and council members. So I will start off with a quick legislative update. I'm going to try this clicker here. Let's see if it works. There we go. Okay, so the first bill I want to bring to your all attention is a trailer bill. So a trailer bill is something that is attached to the budget, and this was introduced with the governor's proposed budget that he introduced in the beginning of January. So for a little bit of background, and this actually leads into an agenda item you have later today, in 2021, Governor Newsom signed SB 155, which created a program for a CEQA statutory exemption for restoration projects within the Department of Fish and Wildlife. This exempts fish and wildlife restoration projects that meet certain requirements for CEQA until 2025. So you've already had one presentation on one such project. That was the Knightson project. I believe that was late last year. And then today, later in the agenda, will be on the Staten Island restoration project. The introduced trailer bill as part of the budget would remove that 2025 sunset date and make the program permanent. This, as I mentioned, this bill is part of the budget, so it'll be part of the budget negotiations as it goes through. And because it's a trailer bill, the bill would take effect immediately upon the budget's signature, assuming it's part of the budget package at the end. There is a deadline to let you all aware of. So on February 16th was the legislature's deadline to introduce bills. There were somewhere around 2,000 bills introduced in the legislature for this session. And there are a few of interest for now that I'll to make you all aware of. I will note that there are quite a few what are called spot bills, and these are bills that are to basically get the foot in the door of the process and start a 30-day clock before they're amended. So there might be more bills that I'll bring to your attention later because they have a little bit more time to be introduced. So the first one is AB 2465 from Assemblymember Gibson. This expands the definition of socially disadvantaged groups in the connection to the Department of Food and Agriculture to include descendants of enslaved persons. Now, this is applicable to the Delta in particular because it requires grant-making agencies, which would include the Delta Conservancy and CNRA, to prioritize the awarding of grant funding to socially disadvantaged groups as defined by that food and agricultural definition when awarding grants and other types of financial assistance. This would sunset in 2031. So this is, as I mentioned, an introduced bill. It's going to go through the process. It just is starting the legislative process in earnest. The next bill is AB 2875 by Assemblymember Friedman. This would make it the policy of the state to ensure that no net loss and ensure the long-term gain in the quantity, quality, and permanence of wetlands acreage and values in California. This is just a policy statement on behalf of the state. Currently, as written, it doesn't have any mechanisms behind it. It's just a policy statement of the legislature. Next is SB 1139. This is from Senator Ashby. This would extend the city of Sacramento's deadline for reaching an urban level of flood protection from 2025 to 2030. You might remember a similar bill that currently is in the process from Senator Eggman last year that would have done the same thing for Mossdale Tract in the Delta. That would have extended it from 2028 to 2030. So both of these bills are currently alive and in the process in the legislature, and I'll keep you all updated as they go through the process. And then the last one that I'll mention is SB 1402 by Senator Min. This requires all state agencies, departments, boards, offices, commissions, and conservancies to take into account the state's 30 by 30 goals when creating plans, policies, and regulations. The state's 30 by 30 is the California Natural Resources Agency program for the state's efforts to conserve 30% of state's lands and waters by 2030. So it'd be taken into consideration on anything that any agency does going forward. Those are the bills I'm highlighting today. I'll go ahead and open it up to the council for the legislative update if there's any questions or comments.
Any questions on the legislative side? Okay.
All right. Well, I will go ahead and move into the next agenda item then, which is the tribal engagement update. Thank you for your words earlier, Chairman Duane. Definitely the heart. We have done quite a bit, but it definitely can always do more. And something that I think, one thing I want to highlight is I'm going to be highlighting the council's efforts, and this is a council-wide effort. This is the planning division, the science division, the science program, public participation, comms. This is something that's a priority for throughout the council, and something that is taking a village to ensure that we're including tribal voices in everything that we do. So the first thing I want to highlight is just consultations. Well, let me take a step back. One, the impetus for this agenda item too was first the Tribal Nations Summit that Chairman Duane and I attended on Monday, but also it's almost a year since the tribal listening session. So just wanted to highlight what has occurred since that listening session, as well as what's to come over the next year as well. So the first is just tribal consultations that the council has undertaken in the past year. There's three main efforts that have had consultation efforts underway. The first is the Environmental and Tribal Justice Issue Paper, and that is working with tribes to understand both tribal justice issues, tribal history of the Delta, and also recommendations for the council to consider through the issue paper. For that consultation, we are currently working with 5 tribes on working in a pre-consultation aspect, which is working with them prior to the release of any draft. When we release the draft for the issue paper, it'll also do a renewed call for consultation where we will do outreach to all tribes to assess interest and start meetings in earnest. The other one is the draft Delta Research Awards notice, and this was working with tribes to make sure that this call for proposals is accessible to tribes, as well as finding ways to make it of interest and applicable. The science program consulted with 2 tribes for this effort, and actually led into the survey that I'll go a little bit more into detail later, but you've heard about up to this point as well. And then lastly is the Delta Adapts Adaptation Plan, and I was asking tribes about which climate strategies to be considered, and also ways to recognize and advance opportunities for tribes to utilize their traditional knowledge through the implementation of those strategies. That has been one tribe that we've consulted with. However, particularly because of just being mindful of tribes' capacity, we did also touch on Delta Adapts aspects within the consultations that we've done for the EJ and tribal issue paper, because there is a little bit of overlap between the two. So to ensure that we reach everyone, we tried to incorporate both as we're going through that and save time and effort. So next is amplifying tribal voices and also listening. I think one thing that we heard from the listening session, and something that I take very seriously in my role as tribal liaison, is the role of finding space for tribal voices in what we do, and also ensuring that tribal considerations are being made, not only just in public, but also just as internal deliberations on council efforts or anything like that. And so a few things to highlight. The first is the upcoming State of Estuary Conference on March 13th. I'll be moderating a panel with a few of the same tribes that were in the tribal listening session, as well as one other, talking about how to help ensure that the title of the conference is Native Hands on the Landscape, Culture is Ecology. So spreading the word to both the attendees of that conference of how to best integrate tribes into restoration projects and other management projects in the Delta. So that's March 13th in the conference from 1 to 3. So I encourage anyone that's attending the conference to attend that panel. The next, as I mentioned, is the survey for the Delta Research Awards. So we did do outreach to prospective research projects that might submit proposals for the Delta Research Awards coming up. We did reach out to them and see if there's interest in partnering with tribal partners on the research projects. We did receive quite a few responses to that. The next step of that was sending that information out to tribes and try to connect tribes with those research partners. We have received some feedback from tribes regarding that, although we have not explicitly made a connection yet. Although there is a lot of benefit from that, because one, we've heard tribes have heard about what research projects are potentially being submitted. We do know of potential tribal research projects that might be submitted as well. So it's all part of the process, and we're really encouraged by the feedback that we've received. The other portion was the Delta Legislative Tour that we did late last year. We included tribal voices as a stop along the way for members of the legislative staff to hear about tribal considerations in the Delta. So that's actually the picture there on the slide. The Bay Delta Science Conference is making a concerted effort to try to include tribal voices in the conference, both in the development of it, in the panels and presentations that are part of it, keynote speakers. So that I'll have more information on that to come, but that is something that the Bay Delta Science Conference is working towards. The science program has been very involved in doing outreach to the California Tribal College. So there was I don't know if a summit's the right word, but it was a gathering of tribal high school students. It was a whole day conference, but the science program was part of presenting to those high school students and talking about the council and how to get involved. And it was a very actually robust conversation with those students as well. And continuing to work with the tribal college to try to amplify opportunities for students to get involved with the council. And then lastly is the tribal statewide events. So one that we already mentioned was the California Tribal Summit, which Chairman Dueño and I have both attended the last 2 years. There was also the Tribal Water Summit late last year, which is part of the development of the California Water Plan that I attended as well. And the Native American Day, the council has regularly had a table at those events to spread the word about the council and opportunities for consultation. One other important aspect is the interweaving of traditional knowledge into how the science program and both Delta Science and Management. So one thing that the Delta Science program is currently working on is an assessment of ways to interweave traditional knowledge. One thing that I want to stress that's been the crux of this entire effort is that it should be a tribal-led effort and something that tribes and tribal leaders should be comfortable with the entire process throughout the way. So this assessment has partnered with a local tribe who's helping us with interviewing and doing outreach to tribes and to make sure that we're doing this the right way. The assessments includes those tribal interviews that I just mentioned. It includes a literature review by science program staff of what's been done to date in the science community, as well as a state agency review to find out what other state agencies have done in this effort of attempting to interweave traditional knowledge into science and management. And then lastly, the Delta Science program, as well as the Delta ISB, has incorporated traditional voices in both events and reviews. So the Adaptive Management Forum included planning efforts, and the planning effort for that included tribal voices on the planning committee for that. The Delta ISB Food Webs workshop included the picture there of Zachary Emerson for United Auburn Indian Community, providing tribal perspectives on food web management. The harmful algal bloom strategy at the science program is working closely with a couple of tribes on that, as well as the grand challenges work that the ISB is working on, as well as Science for Communities. All have tribal voices that are part of that effort, and I'm doing outreach for that. One other note I have here, going back to the traditional knowledge assessment, is that those interviews, we've already had interviews of 5 tribes and are continuing to do outreach to other tribes to continue those interviews. So to wrap up, just a few things that are upcoming, just to highlight. One is updating our tribal consultation policy. The council adopted a tribal consultation policy in 2013, so it's been close to almost 10 years since that's been updated. So going through a consultation process with tribes to see how that can be improved and worked upon. Continuing outreach to present, to both have tribes plan, be part of, and participate in council science program and ISB events. The Delta Research Awards I mentioned will be upcoming, and so continue to do outreach to tribes to encourage tribal participation and grant applications for that research awards. Consultation on those initiatives I mentioned will continue throughout the year through finalization of each of those initiatives and even afterwards to ensure tribes are part of the implementation efforts. And then lastly, continuing coordination of other Delta agencies. I think we've mentioned in the past that the council is leading Bay Delta tribal engagement effort where all natural resource agency groups, agency tribal liaisons come together to coordinate and learn best practices for outreach, specifically the Bay Delta tribes. So that continues as we go forward as well. And also coordinating efforts not to make sure we're not asking too much of tribes at the same time and trying to get a process for you go, we go kind of thing to make sure we're not asking too much of their time. With that, that is both of those. I'll open it up to the council for any questions on our tribal efforts or any legislative questions that might have come up since then.
Questions of Brandon? Brandon, just a couple things for me. You know, something that just the idea came from attending the event on Monday. The chief who spoke on behalf of the Native American Heritage Commission and how they've become a clearinghouse specifically for the Native American graves repatriation efforts in the colleges. And what I heard pretty loud and clear from some of those that have been very involved is they lack the resources. They lack the ability to get involved, again, because of capacity issues, resource issues. And the idea I thought, coming out of there is that an organization that we can work with, the Native American Heritage Commission, where I think they vet, participants for this, but could they also be a clearinghouse for other efforts to where we, again, it's a project on adaptation, a project on tabs, so that again, there is a clearinghouse, but it also has a clearinghouse that has stipends or grants, funding resources, if you will, so that those experts that are coming from these tribes are now also going to be compensated so that again, they are going to be able to stick with with any of the state's projects. So that was just one thought, idea that I had. And then the other is on the consultation. And I don't know if maybe I thought I got it correctly with one of the tribal leaders who said, we really want to be part of co-management in any and all aspects with regard to natural resources, including the Delta. We want to make sure that we get early tribal consultation in the process. We want to make sure that water conservation is part of this. We want to make sure that river restoration is part of this, but also the 30 by 30 was very important to them, which takes me to the last comment, and that was with regard to, where is it? I thought, wow, why aren't we talking more about this? And I have a little too much Sudafed in my system apparently because I can't find my notes. But again, with regard to the tribal communities and, oh, I know what it was. There was an idea or a thought of renaming islands. And again, that was really important with the talk that they gave to the governor. Why can't some of the islands in the Delta be renamed after Native American? And so, do you know if that's just a thought, or are they just putting that out there as a general theme, or is there going to be some real work and dedicated resources in that arena? Do you know?
Yeah. So I'll start with the Native American Heritage Commission. So that is, for anyone who doesn't have any background on that, that's an agency that's within the Natural Resources Agency that's charged with being a clearinghouse really for all the contacts for tribal nations. So they put together a list of both federally and non-federally recognized tribes that state agencies and cities have to reach out to them before doing CEQA, before doing any projects on consultation to get the actual contact list for outreach. So yeah, at the summit, one thing we heard is they're starting a regulatory process to put regulations in place on how that list is developed and updated going forward. The NAHC is under the Natural Resources Agency, and so they are part of the tribal liaison meetings that I attend. So there is coordination with NAHC on their efforts in that respect. On grants and capacity building, so that is definitely a priority throughout, I think, the state in general. There's a few different opportunities currently for capacity building. So I don't know if it would be only under the Native American Heritage Commission, but there are others. So one is the Natural Resources Agency has their Tribal Nature-Based Solutions grant program that I believe just closed or is currently open and about to close. They're in the process. And that is for tribes to have grants that can work towards capacity building for nature-based solutions involving incorporating traditional knowledge, things like that. The Strategic Growth Council also currently is in the process of reviewing grants for capacity building for addressing climate change. So there have been quite a few opportunities throughout different agencies for capacity building. And I think one thing from the Tribal Nations Summit that we heard specifically from the governor was a commitment to protect that funding, even with the budget challenges that are there currently. So there are quite a few different opportunities for capacity building throughout the state right now for tribes. Lastly, on renaming islands, that is definitely a CNRA effort. I think one thing that Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs, David Thompson, also mentioned at the summit is working on, I think they're primarily focused right now on addressing the derogatory term that starts with S that is quite prevalent throughout the state, and focusing on renaming those. But I'm sure that there are other options throughout the state for renaming. So that's one thing I can take back to to her and discuss what opportunities there might be.
Thank you so much.
Question on that. Do you know of any islands that are named with derogatory terms?
I don't. I have not. I know there's no SQ out in the Delta, but I'd have to look and see. We have not heard that from tribes through the issue paper, but we also haven't explicitly asked that yet. But we certainly can going forward if there are any that we should take a look at.
I was looking to see if they had, but no, ma'am. Thank you for Daniel. If you can hear us, we're just checking to see if you had any questions.
Thank you. I can hear.
Okay.
Okay, well, if there aren't any further questions, I'm going to invite Brandon to stay up there for the next item that he's also part of, Renaissance Man. And I'm also going to invite up Ryan Stambra, Henry DeBay, Jeff Henderson, and Minachi Odayaptan once again, who's standing in for Amanda Bowl, and we're going to discuss council priorities. And then after I conclude with that discussion, we can take public comment.
Sounds good.
The council staff have proposed a set of work plan priorities for 2024 as part of your packet as we continue the long-term work of planning in pursuit of our agency's mission and Delta Plan implementation, but also trying to keep an eye on the near-term needs of projects and trends in the Delta. This dual role of considering both the immediate and long-range time horizons is at the core of the council's work. So for this year, we propose continuing the council's work in 3 primary areas, which staff will discuss in more detail: implementing the Delta Plan and its recommendations and regulations, advancing a shared body of science to improve decision-making, something that we often refer to as One Delta, One Science, and enhancing our engagement and outreach with partner agencies, communities, and as you just heard, tribes. Before turning it over to staff for the presentation, I would just add that this work plan is based on what we reasonably foresee in terms of certifications of consistency appeals for the coming year. However, since those are processes that we do not have complete control over, the work plan may need to change and adapt to accommodate any appeals or additional unexpected early consultation for covered actions. So with that, I'd like to welcome our executive team here to the table, and I guess I'll turn it over to Ryan first.
Great. Thank you, Jessica, and good afternoon, Chair and council members. For the record, Ryan Stambra, I'm the Chief Deputy Executive Officer, joined here by my executive colleagues who I'll allow to introduce themselves as they present. Really excited to be with you this afternoon to present what I foresee as a relatively ambitious agenda for 2024. Really looking forward to building off of the success that we presented to you all in January covering the 2023 annual report. So with that, I will turn it over to Deputy Executive Officer Jeff Henderson to start outlining Objective 1.
I'd first like to highlight our ongoing council process effort, set priorities, investment, Delta levies, likely. WR presented a levy work. Is that better? Oh, that's way better. No, I very much appreciate it. It was a little weird to have to be that close. So back to DLIST. DLIST is the council's process to lead a multi-agency effort to set priorities for investments in Delta levees to reduce the likelihood and the outcomes of levee failures. You'll recall that DWR presented a levee funding report for 2019 through 2023 to the council in December. Staff is currently reviewing and analyzing that report and will update the council regarding how levee investments between those years have impacted island-specific flood risk this spring. Delta Adapts continues with a major milestone tomorrow for our adaptation plan. We'll present draft strategies and actions, providing time for questions and discussion from council members and time for questions and discussion from the public. We anticipate releasing the adaptation plan for public review this spring and bringing it to the council for consideration and potential adoption in the summer. Next, I'd like to acknowledge our efforts to complete rulemaking related to the 2022 Delta Plan Ecosystem Amendment. We'll release a notice of proposed rulemaking for the ecosystem regulations in the spring and hold a public hearing in May. Based on that timeline, the updated regulations could take effect in 2025. We'll complete our annual progress report to the council related to the targets achieved for the Delta Plan performance measures. This year, we're looking forward to including progress on the new and revised performance measures established by the Ecosystem Amendment. We'll also continue to enhance collaboration between scientists and CBOs to address important Delta issues and data needs by hosting a second Science for Communities event this fall. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. For covered actions, we anticipate a similar or a higher number of certifications of consistency this year as we've seen in past years, with ongoing potential for appeals. As a focus for 2024, council staff will continue to engage in early consultation with DWR regarding the Delta Conveyance Project, anticipating certification of that project and any potential appeals in 2025. Council staff has initiated a second 5-year review of the Delta Plan, using the performance measures as a framework for the review. We anticipate completing the 5-year review and presenting it to the council in coming months. And our first 5-year review in 2019 identified EJ, or environmental justice, as a key issue for the council's focus, recommending that we prepare an issue paper to inform future actions to address environmental justice. We anticipate completing a public review draft of that issue paper and presenting it to the council later this year. I'll now hand it off to my colleague, Brandon Chapin.
Thanks. Brandon Chapin, Legislative Policy Advisor. I'm going to cover the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee since Amanda Bull, our Special Assistant for Planning and Science, is out today. So building off of what Minachi had covered a little bit ago, a few more highlights for DPIC in the upcoming year. First is that full DPIC will gather this autumn on October 28th. And between now and then, we anticipate another restoration subcommittee meeting and possibly a restoration forum between now and then as well. In addition, the fifth Delta Crosscut budget report will also be compiled and released in early autumn. We've also started to consider what comes next with the understanding of science funding in the Delta and anticipate continuing to annually collect the funding data found in the Crosscut budget report, but how can we use this information to help increase science funding into the future? With that, I'm actually not sure. I will pass it on to Henry.
How's this mic? Can you hear me? Great. So Chairman Dueño, council members, good afternoon. My name is Henry DeBay. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for Science at the council. So I manage the science division in close coordination with our lead scientist. We have a very busy and exciting year ahead on the science front, and all of the projects I'm about to run through. Really, the common thread that they share is that they all work towards advancing the science program's mission and providing management relevant science and scientific information to you, the council, toward the implementation of the Delta Plan and to the broader community. And I will apologize for the lack of, cool graphics, people jumping out of helicopters to sample water and whatnot. So a little bit dry. Anyhow, starting with the Delta Research Awards. So Brandon already alluded to this, but this year we're planning to administer a $6 million call for research projects that advance the implementation of the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda. And one of the things that sets this call apart from past ones is that we're planning to include a small award category to really reduce the barriers of entry, particularly for social science projects. Another thing we're doing is we're encouraging where feasible the co-production of science with communities and tribes. So the plan is to issue the call soon, run proposals through multiple rounds of independent review, and issue awards to the most competitive projects in the fall. Regarding the Delta Science Fellows, so this is similar to the Delta Research Awards, but really focuses on funding early career scientists, including masters, PhD, and postdoctoral scholars. And the plan is to issue a call for those awards competitively later this year as well. Supporting science-based decision-making. So this is a bit of an umbrella term for three key initiatives. One is the upcoming Salinity Management Workshop in March, which will discuss tools and strategies for managing ocean saltwater intrusion in the Delta. And as Jessica mentioned, this is separate from what you heard about earlier regarding the Just Transition kind of UC funded project, separate but related, and we're in close coordination with them to avoid any duplication and redundancy. The second thing under supporting science-based decision-making is our efforts to promote a modeling community that advances integrated and transparent modeling to better and more inclusively inform decision-making. Third are synthesis working groups that we're hosting in collaboration with NCES. That's the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis at UC Santa Barbara, through which, among other things, we're synthesizing existing data to look at the social benefits of restoration across the Delta. On the independent scientific peer review front, we're actively working on a number of key peer reviews of state and federal science at the request of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and Department of Water Resources. And these reviews will help to inform operations of the Central Valley and state water projects. And I believe our lead scientist will touch on these reviews in a little bit more detail shortly. Science communication, a lot could be said here, but perhaps the biggest two are the upcoming Bay Delta Science Conference, which is really, if not the biggest, one of the biggest conferences for the region. This will be held from September 30th to October 2nd of this year. Also upcoming is the 2024 issue of the State of Bay Delta Science, which is part of our Delta Science strategy. You know, I'm throwing a lot of terms and acronyms at you. But SBDS synthesizes current understanding, or this next issue will synthesize current understanding of extreme climatic and weather events like atmospheric rivers and wildfires. Moving to harmful algal blooms, or the harmful algal bloom monitoring strategy. So at the request of the Central Valley Water Quality Control Board and the State Water Resources Control Board, in the coming months, we're hoping to finalize a proposed strategy for coordinated monitoring of cyanobacterial harmful algal blooms. So those are the blue-green algae. Next, for the Delta Science Plan update, so the Delta Science Plan is called for in the Delta Plan and is really meant to catalyze science coordination and focus science efforts across agencies. So the science program developed an initial plan in 2013, updated it in 2019, and we're aiming to collaboratively develop another update this year for finalization in 2025. Next slide, thanks. Way ahead of me. So in 2024, work continues toward building the inventory and uptake of the Delta Science Tracker. This is a web-based platform that collates all research projects in the Delta and aims to promote communication and coordination among scientists and decision makers and the public. Interweaving traditional knowledge assessment, you already heard about this from Brandon, but this is really an exciting opportunity for us to understand if, and if so, how we can best interweave traditional knowledge with the Western science work that we typically work on. And then last but not least, we continue to provide staff support to the Delta Independent Science Board, who as you all know, have a number of priorities and reviews planned for 2024. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. And I'll move us on to objective number 3. This is enhancing outreach and engagement. And I would say, as important as the first 2 objectives are, this third objective is those first 2 objectives without the work of this third objective really would not be as potent and as impactful as they could be. This objective really, I think, ties together a lot of the work in terms of awareness and education and outreach and the relationship building that I think so many of us here hold a value and continue to work towards. The first item here is the justice, equity, diversion, and inclusion update. And this is something that I think that this council has been made aware of in the last couple of years, and something I'm proud to continue to be working on with so many of my colleagues at the council. As the council is aware, the mission of this organization is to implement a legally enforceable long-term management plan, a legally enforceable long-term management plan that furthers the state's co-equal goals for the Delta. And from staff's perspective, part of supporting this mission is continuing to explore ways to better integrate JEDI principles both within the council's work as well as its organizational culture. And so really to that end, in 2024, staff is planning to bring on a JEDI officer who will be tasked with leading the JEDI committee's activities. This is an internal committee that is established at the council. And this position would be tasked with, among other things, developing an equity action plan for the organization. And really, in my view, bringing on this particular expertise is something that I'm excited about, because not only doing so, I think we'll be continue to bring capacity for this organization in terms of an opportunity to grow, but also really truly catalyze this commitment going forward, both in the terms of the work that I think Brandon and so many others have been working on. And really excited to continue to report back to the council in terms of the progress being made in this space. So. I'll cover this. So social science integration. Ultimately, similar to what we've talked about before in terms of, this is a broad umbrella term in terms of both the work that's happening in terms of the tribal work, in terms of the environmental justice and the CBO connections, really understanding the human element of the work and the impact of decision-making that it has on the people who live, work, and recreate within the Delta. So in continuing to advance that work, I think you heard last year in terms of the Delta Residence Survey, which our Sea Grant fellow, Jess Rudnick, led and spearheaded, and really looking to explore ways in which we can implement what we learned from that residence survey into our work and continue to kind of build those inroads into the community itself. And so really that is a big priority for us going forward, and something that I think really will continue to advance kind of in the spirit of the mission of the organization.
All right, and then for those last 2, I won't go into detail on the tribal outreach one. You just received a long presentation on that. But just a reminder that updating the tribal consultation policy, I think, is something that'll be a big priority this year, and a big push just to make sure that that's updated going forward. And then the last one here is policymaker outreach and partnership. And so that entails all of the meet and greets that Chairman Dueño has done, both with in the state legislature and also continuing to build relationships with the Delta counties. Going forward, well, I do not think we'll be doing a Delta legislative tour this year. It includes stuff like that for when requested by members of the legislature. And then continue just relationship building both with policymakers at the state and local level going forward. With that, I will pass it back to you, or we just open it up?
Pass it back.
No, pass it back.
I would just close in recognizing that the ambitious agenda that I think we set out here today is really not possible without really the tremendous staff that we all have the opportunity to work with on a daily basis. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't point that out in terms of the work here. Also want to acknowledge not only the staff the program staff, but as well as kind of our unsung heroes on the admin side. Obviously, what makes an agency go in terms of budgets, human resources, IT, as well as we've got our great contracts. Do not want to miss the contracts team, as well as our comms team, our public participation unit, who I know you all get a chance to work with on a monthly basis. And really just want to, like I said, shout out everyone to this organization, because really the success and the ability to pull these sort of things off is not really possible without them. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you and the council members for any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you again, Jeff, Brandon, Henry. As always, a great presentation, great updates. I'm going to see if we have. Oh, well, you know what? Let's start with Councilmember Zingali, so I don't forget him. Let's start with our remote council member. Yes, Daniel.
Oh, thanks, Virginia, and thanks, gentlemen, for the presentation. I quickly just wanted to support the practice of some financial compensation or support for participants, particularly from the social sciences. I know it's a very basic thing to do, but in my experience, it can really make a difference in terms of equity and inclusion. So I'm glad we're doing that. And I just wanted to follow up on. I'm intrigued by the planned research around the social benefits of Delta restoration. And I was just wondering if you could give us just a brief glimpse of some of the thinking or the hypotheses behind, like what might be some of the outcomes, or what are we looking for there?
Thank you, Councilmember Zingale. So I think I'm probably best positioned to answer that one. And I'm not going to give you a great answer. So apologies for that. So just a little bit of background. So these synthesis working groups, again, these are in collaboration with NCs, which is really world renowned. And they're data scientists, they're synthesis scientists. And what we've been doing for the last few years is bringing together a lot of early to mid-career data scientists across the Delta, working for federal and state agencies and academia, and putting them all in a room, training them up on the latest methods and tools for synthesis, and then having them come up with questions, and obviously with input from the outside. And so for this latest round, I think the first round a couple years ago was focused on synthesizing data for food webs, and this latest round is a little bit more social science focused, again with the idea of imbuing and steeping a lot of what we do with more considerations of the human dimensions and social sciences. So this latest round of NCs is looking at synthesizing social science data, which there isn't as much social science data as there is natural and physical data. So based on the data that is available, it sounds like they are looking, yes, at how the social benefits of restoration are distributed across the Delta. They're also looking at how infrastructure and the benefits of infrastructure are distributed across the Delta. But I have to say, beyond that, those synthesis working groups are really still underway. And our plan is to actually have them present later this year or early next year when the analyses are completed. But I just wouldn't want to comment on what more than that, just given that these efforts are still in flux and fluid. So apologies for the non-answer, but appreciate the question.
I understand, Henry. We'll look forward to some findings several months down the road. Thank you.
Other questions?
On the objective one, first of all, thank you. I mean, this is very, very comprehensive. When we talk about the corporate action and potential appeals, that means both the updating of the plan and dealing with the appeals that come through projects. What is exactly?
it's referring to the council's covered actions process, which refers to projects that need to demonstrate consistency with the Delta plan
Okay.
and file a certification of consistency. The reason we highlight it in this way in the annual priorities is because we always are standing at the ready to deal with an appeal. We have no control over timing or consideration of when a filed certification of consistency may arrive and who and how many different aspects there may be engaged in an appeal. So it's accounted for in this way essentially to acknowledge that variable, I think as Jessica spoke to at the outset, that variable in sort of how we present these priorities is all subject to the workload capacity because our first priority remains dealing with certifications of consistency and appeals.
Yes, I thought so, that it's an ongoing process that you guys deal with, right? I mean, it depends what comes in. I mean, you don't regulate the amount of work, but yet you have to be responsive to it all throughout, right?
And we have a dedicated unit that's out there, you know, scanning for new EIRs and new projects and who needs to be on the active projects list so that we're aware of the landscape of planning, you know, what status do each of those projects have. We produce that in the active projects list, writing these comment letters. So reading the environmental documents and comparing them to the Delta Plans regulations. So there's a lot of activity there that's constant in the background, but the variables are, you know, when the projects are ready to file, and then whether they're appealed.
Sure. And then when we talk about that, it's how much of the time it absorbs of the staff and how much extra work it is for you. And then vis-a-vis the 5-year review of the Delta plan, I mean, that is also something that is a requirement, right? So, so the question is that also has to happen, right? Because if not, then, okay. It's not one over the other, although you don't control the first one in a way.
Fair to say we have a lot of competing priorities.
Sure, exactly. So I was thinking about it, and then if the update will create more appeals later on, that's an extra layer that could be added to your work throughout the year.
That's right.
Is it? Good, okay. And then I had a question about the science tracker. Is the science tracker always the same mechanism, the way it works?
As far as I know, yes.
Yeah.
So again, the Delta Science Tracker has been a multi-year effort, and actually the way it was designed was through input from a collaborative group of state and agency and academic folks. And it's a web-based platform where people can upload research projects they're working on, link to publications that have come out of those projects, identify the research teams that are associated with those projects. It's meant to be you know, an online central place where if you want to know everything that's happening in terms of research in the Delta, you can go there and find out. So that again, to promote collaborations between scientists, so that decision makers can be aware of the research that's happening or not happening, and what area and on what topics. So there are a number of filters in there that you can use to kind of organize the information. And I will say, do we have every project, every research project that's ever been done in the Delta and the tracker yet? No. And that's something we're actively working on.
The reason I'm asking is because, in a way, because of all the changes that Delta is going through and everything that we're dealing with, is that ever impacting what the tracker does? That's why I asked, is it always the same? I know that the content and the way that the machine itself works is the same, right? But what goes in it and what doesn't, given what the priorities are, in a way, I'm like, okay, how do we gauge that?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess just to be clear, so the science tracker doesn't synthesize any information. It really is just a database of projects. And so you can't go there and say, hey, tell me the latest on, you know, atmospheric rivers or wildfires. It's really just
That's to come with AI and all of that. I would
I wish
imagine.
it was, because in my mind, it was like when you want to know the latest of the latest in the issues, you go to a database that doesn't flatly put everything together, but somehow prioritize things that are important versus the ones that are old and unimportant. But it
Right.
doesn't, right? I
Right.
think I'm
And
really-
so, but if somebody like Dr. Daniel Swain, who I think most people probably know here as a pretty well-renowned climate scientist who covers climate change and extreme weather on the west coast of the Americas, if he publishes a new paper on how atmospheric rivers, their frequency, their intensity is changing, that's the kind of thing we want to make sure is in the Delta Science Tracker.
As far as the science goes, I'm really interested, as I was listening, I'm thinking about how science has traditionally been on predicting based on patterns, and we are in such a shift right now, socially, climate, all of those things, that it's hard to do those predictions. And when there's new things that are coming in, it's hard to really be able to depend on those things. And when I made that comment about AI, the thing is that for the longest time there was conflict between what the science said, and so now we're trying to bring that all together. So it's just an interesting conversation.
Oh, without a doubt. Ryan, I think it was you. I think it was you. It's my Sudafed again. With regard to the objective 3, Jedi, and moving forward, and let me just tell you, first and foremost, these priorities that we've set out for 2024, yes, incredibly aggressive, but just taking a look at who we have working on all of these priorities, the team that we have, the talent that we have, dedicated staff, there's no question that we can get through a very successful year in implementing. But again, going to your comment on Jedi, and I was thinking, okay, let's take a look at what we can do again from that lens, from that perspective. And you go to objective 1, go to objective 2, and just to give you an example, and I thought, okay, so we're going to put out again what we do for the Delta Science Fellows and the Delta Research Awards. Will we now maybe take a look a little bit closer on, who are we awarding this to? And are we looking at it from that perspective? The science fellows that we bring on board, are we looking at it and bringing those on from that perspective? I mean, the list goes on and on. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for bringing that up, Chairman Dueño. I think it really is an all of the above kind of strategy in terms, but I think we first start out with obviously bringing this individual on. My first kind of point of direction to that individual will really be to focus on looking at what we've done, past practices, and really identifying the opportunities to where we can better understand and really advance that sort of work, whether it is on recruitment, whether it is on looking at who have received funds in the past in terms of research funding. Really, I think this is why I see the position really as an opportunity both internally and externally to really kind of grow. I think the biggest challenge here is to be as measured and intentional, kind of thoughtful going forward, because like you said, it is easy to get overwhelmed in saying we want to do it all. And think ultimately, there may be opportunities to where we can really identify that. But I think first we have to continue to, we have to start to walk before we can really run. And one of the things that I've really been trying to learn more about and learn from my colleagues at other agencies who have spent more time and frankly are a little bit further along in this work. And so really, once again, I think being very thoughtful in terms of how we move forward, but to your point, it's a great one, is there is a lot of opportunity for which I think we can see where we can make some inroads and advance our work.
Thank you. That was a very thoughtful answer. The other is, the whole notion of, advancing the opportunity to call on one Delta, one science. And just in the latest conversations and rounds of conversations we've been having with CSAMP and hearing the discussion yesterday with CSAMP for 3 hours. And again, the whole science, and Henry, you know where I'm going with this. It almost seems like the Delta Stewardship Council is so well positioned to become really the clearinghouse, if you will. And that's something that I really would love to strive for. As I take a look at, again, you have all of these competing, maybe that's not even the word, but I do see it as almost competing voices. We're all trying to achieve the same goal, I think, but we're going about it a little bit differently. But I think that we really are in a position, I believe, as we advance our priorities, as we advance our work, as we advance our work plan to again become a hub, a clearinghouse, if you will, where more and more recognition will come to our team and what we're putting out there in terms of the work product and the science that that again I think all of us are striving for, that one science, one delta, one delta, one science. But really want to commend the amazing team, and really looking forward to an exciting, really an exciting future for all of us. And I want to go back to the objective too on the interweaving traditional knowledge, and how does that factor in again when we're talking about competing interests just on the agency side, but what about that tribal engagement? And again, their traditional knowledge and interweaving that into our mix. How does that work? How do you see that working?
And does their traditional knowledge agree with each other?
Exactly.
And that's part of the tribal interviews. That's part of that assessment. It's to understand where are the intersections, where are the places that maybe there's more work that needs to be done to understand the differences. I think one thing in particular is like where is the appropriate place for the counts? Because this is also a very sensitive topic for tribes too, because there's a long history of depredations and taking, and so just making sure that we're doing this the right way. So that's one reason why we have a tribe helping us along the way, by both with the interviews and with the outreach, to ensure that we're going about this in a way that's respectful and ensures that we're doing this the right way.
And Henry, I'm going to ask you as our scientist, how do you see that working? Again, from not just from the policy perspective, but from the science perspective, how are the scientists going to receive this? Again, the ability to be able to interweave.
I am filled with unsatisfying answers today.
I
I don't know is the short answer to that question. And I think, well, first of all, staff within the science program have really looked at this. So Brandon mentioned this literature review. Staff have done a literature review to see where are there examples of this being done well, where are there examples of this not being done well, how does it look? I think, as Brandon mentioned, we want to be very thoughtful and respectful, and really avoid being extractive and really trying to force one knowledge system into another, hence the wording of interweaving, and kind of braiding these knowledge systems together and having them acknowledge and talk to one another as appropriate. Even, this is something we've thought about internally. One Delta, one science. That's a great unifying term, but it uses the word science. It doesn't use the word knowledge. And so, again, we're very early in all of this. I think it's a really important line of work. I think, where others are doing this, we're not, out on a limb here. This is happening across the state. This is happening across the world, and we want to be responsive as well to the extent that we can, within the Delta. So I think it's too early to say and to respond to that question, but I think it's a really, it'll be interesting to see. And I think it will be interesting to see what these interviews with tribes render. Um, do they want the science program to be working on this? Would they rather that we not? And we will fully respect, wherever that lands. So again, a little bit early, but exciting, and I think important work.
Absolutely. And by the way, that was a good answer.
And I would echo, this is a science program-led effort. This isn't, and I'm involved, but it's not just like the tribal engagement side. It's the science program that's wanting to do this and then incorporating it into what they're doing.
Excellent. Thank you. Other questions? If not, I will ask for public comment.
Actually, first, do you mind if I
Oh,
wrap
yes,
up?
yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you. So I just want to express my appreciation for the staff and my team that have come up here and told you about all that we hope and plan to do. It is ambitious, and we're a small agency, right? We've got about 60 people undertaking all this work. As you know, it takes a lot of work to build trust and move the partnerships forward. And so much of the work we do in implementing the Delta Plan isn't about regulating, right? It's about recommendations and guidance and leadership. So I'm really proud of what our small team can do. And I'm looking forward to a lot of products coming out of this year, and then all the implementation that's going to go along with that. So kind of an exciting milestone in 2024, I think, for the council. And then for the remainder of today's agenda, next we're going to hear from the lead scientist, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers, and then a presentation from multiple entities on the Staten Island Wetland Restoration and Carbon Farming for Habitat project. And then in closing, DWR's Carrie Buckman will present us an update on the ongoing activities of the Delta Conveyance project. So that concludes my executive officer's report, and now we can do public comment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Now we will move on to public comments. Emma, is there any public comments on this item?
We have a public comment on Zoom. Sarah Lesmeister. Sarah, you should be able to speak.
Sorry, that was an accident. My apologies.
Okay, great. Then there are no other public comments.
Okay, we will now move on to our next item, 7, and that is a report from sorry, Barta, from our lead scientist, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for inviting me to give some updates on what's happened in the past month within the Delta Science Program. I think you can see from the presentations that you just heard, it's been an incredibly busy month. Everybody is amazing that I work with. I really don't use that word lightly. It's an incredible team. I feel incredibly lucky. I'm going to start this presentation with a highlight of a paper that we actually decided as a team would be a good one to cover. It's more of an essay than a that's the by the numbers, but there's another graphic there. Thank you so much. This was more of an essay. There's actually no numbers in here. This isn't so it didn't even have any graphics in it. It's basically a framing of the way we need to think about science opportunities to improve water supply in this quote hotter, drier future that we're looking at. So there's a nice animation that I'm not sure if it works, but when you see it, you'll like it. No, it's not working. That's okay. So these graphics were actually provided by the lead author, Mike Dettinger, who is from USGS, but he's at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. And these graphics really are here to show what's changing. It's not just all about hotter, drier. It's really about the form of precipitation that's changing. So just to kind of want to orient you to what you're seeing here in this graphic. The top graph is showing you basically if you look right smack in the middle, it's about 2020. And so it's showing you the past total California precipitation and then projected future precipitation, thinking about that center line. And this is Sasha Gershinoff, actually, whose paper. They all work together at this Center for Western Water down at Scripps. And actually, Sasha is a lead author on this next issue of the State of the Bay Delta Science on atmospheric rivers. So this is some work from Nature Scientific Reports, and it makes the case quite well that in California, our average is about 600 millimeters precipitation per year, and that's not really what's changing. It's always been volatile. It's going to continue to be volatile. It might be more volatile, but what's really changing is the size of the storm. So we're losing sort of the middle-sized storms, but we're going to have more of the small ones, sort of unimportant, and then the large, big atmospheric rivers. And so you can see from this these second two graphics on here that there's going to be about a 30% increase. All of these 10 global climate models are predicting that, and then the same is true. There's a 30% decrease of the non-atmospheric rivers. And so that's where we're headed. And so rather than focus on just what are we going to do with less water, their idea in this essay was, what can we do to hold on to this water that we're getting? So how can we sort of move forward there and leverage what we have currently? So the focus of this paper is on headwaters. And so by that, we really mean just non-channelized water, water that's not inside of a channel. And they focus on really three potential ways to push that forward. One is through forest management and soil percolation in upstream reaches. The second one is through beaver reintroductions. And the third one is thinking about upstream forecast-informed reservoir operations, not just thinking about downstream flood prevention, but upstream storage. And so the graphic on the lower left is basically one of mountain meadows that, we have 280,000 acres of these in California. About 50,000 could really use some improvement. And so there's some potential there. But the idea of this paper, again, is that we start focusing on what we can do to hold these in the upstream areas longer. I think another key point of this paper is that over the last 100 years, we've already seen a shift in peak runoff. It used to be later in the year. Now it's coming earlier. So what we're losing is that slow water, the water that moves slowly through the landscape. We've tended to channelize things for use, and then it leaves the system earlier. But if you're thinking about future base flow conditions to try to provide some colder water, these are some ways to try to promote that upstream and have slower water, colder water coming out in a more even distribution rather than peaks that are hard to catch and utilize. So I think the key here is that we're trying to mimic snow, really, because we're losing the snowpack. So these are ways of theoretically mimicking snow. Some of the arguments that he makes, and I should say, and Anna and Garrett as well in this paper, the arguments that they make are that we're already going to be doing a whole lot of forest management because wildfires. So there's some opportunities there in terms of forest thinning and soil improvements, things like increasing retention of organic matter in that soil that can help retain water. And that's one thing we can do. Another thing we can do is enhance meadow restoration and beaver reintroductions, for example. And if you're not really a fan of beavers because they mess up the plumbing that you paid so much money to do, we can mimic beavers and put small dams in on the landscape. And the third one again is this upstream upstream forecast-informed reservoir operations, where instead of just thinking about, again, the big dams and trying to release them, like right now, Shasta is just getting dumped out to prevent flooding, but we we can think about the upstream. There's a lot of little upstream dams above these big reservoirs, and those could be held for longer to enhance infiltration and so on. So there's instead of thinking about them just for hydropower production, we can think about them for other things as well. And I think that's really the theme of this paper that I hope you can appreciate, is that if you look at the water supply strategy for California, or the climate report, or the water resilience plan and things like that, these topics come up, but they're sort of in separate ways. Like, for example, if you look at the climate assessment, the one that came out in 2018, the fourth California climate assessment, any reference to meadows is in the traditional knowledge section. And it's almost like it's separate. And then anything about forest thinning or soils management is in the forest section. But no, they don't talk about them together. And so the point is that in water resource management, we know that these actions will be happening on the landscape. Can we leverage them? Don't think of them as co-benefits to water, but actually the purpose of them being water management. So the paper is really more of a thought process, and it's important for us to start thinking about this as an integrated system and not as just independent pieces of an overall environmental management plan. So I'm going to mention that there are other ways to store water in the landscape. There's working lands like pasture and agriculture, flood ups to recharge aquifers. There's managed aquifer recharge. I think you heard about this last summer from Laurel Larson about some ideas that are happening on the San Joaquin. So those things are more engineering approaches, and this paper was really trying to point out things that are already happening on the landscape that we could optimize for enhanced retention of waters that are upstream in non-channelized situations. So that is really the point of this paper. Any thoughts or comments?
We'll start with Councilmember Hueso and then Councilmember Burgess.
I just simply wanted to share some perspectives in terms of my own experience working on issues related to water capture and the environment and overall, and how the Delta ties into that whole system that begins in the Sierras. And it's now seeming that while we're still getting snow in the Sierras, it's not in the amount that we used to grow. And the rainfall events seem to be depositing more water in the state in one-time events that don't necessarily enhance. The exception that of last year that saw just an enormous amount of snow. This year, we're not seeming to get the same amount of snowpack, but extremely aggressive rainfall events that are leading to flows that are really unprecedented. Talking about, Southern California just in particular, the flooding that it happened out in the desert that rarely happens. What happened in San Diego that rarely happens. We saw quite a bit of flooding in the LA region with the last rain event that affected that area a little more intensely than everywhere else. But looking at the Delta and seeing if there are in the future more intense rain events, what does that mean to the flow of the river, and having rainfall come in kind of these intense events that wash out rivers at a speed and intensity that's very unusual historically. I think about San Diego. We used to have salmon runs in the Tijuana River Valley, so much so that there was a cannery there that used to fish salmon as early as basically 100 years ago. We still had salmon runs in San Diego, where today that river it's completely dammed. There are only flows during rain events, and in this last rain event, it caused an intense flooding there like nothing we've ever seen. And what does that mean to that watershed and its ability to sustain kind of the species that normally have occupied that under different conditions? And as we look at the state, what does that mean? And working with the last water bond that we did, we ensured that there would be some level of water capture, whether either through flooding of fields to supply the aquifers in the Central Valley that have seen quite a bit of the lowering of the level that's a result of the extraction, which is anyway, I forget the word, subsidence, 34 feet of subsidence in some areas. We're trying to reverse that, but I'm looking at the Tulare Lake that was formed. There's a lake that was formed in Death Valley right now, pretty big lake. But what are we doing to capture that water? We're really not set up to capture it. Tulare Lake, we're not capturing that water right now. That's not kind of what we intended with the bond. The idea is that that water would be used to recharge the aquifer, that we'd have the means to do it by now. And unfortunately, that's an opportunity lost. The site's reservoir has been planned for I don't know how many years now, or decades now, and that seems like a good moderating solution to what's going to be very extreme flows in the future. And if we see those events come, what is that going to mean to the Delta if we don't have a way to minimize those flows, divert water in a way that will minimize the flows, and to stop this overwhelming of land that has farming that could potentially introduce nitrates into the watershed through these events? I think that's something for us to think about and contemplate and try to design a system across the state. I mean, if we don't really work upstream in the state of California in terms of upstream of the Delta, I think if these conditions continue well into the future and become more aggressive, I can see that being a very destructive element on the environment of the waters. Anyway, I just want to share those comments. Thank you.
Great comments. I don't know, Lisa, did you want to comment on any?
Yeah, only to agree, and I think also just make the plug. Sites reservoir great, but the potential for more storage in subsurface environments is actually far superior to the reservoirs as a solution.
Councilmember Burgess.
Thank you.
If we can get it in there.
So as far as the snowpack goes, even if we do get the same level of snow that we would normally or hope to expect, because of global warming, it's warming up faster and exiting sooner. And so it's not the dribble that it used to be. It's entering the system faster. So it is. I appreciate this presentation because there was something I was going to ask you about, but with the atmospheric river predictions on there, it went 75 years into the future. And so I'm just curious, with everything being so unpredictable, how was that predicted?
Well, I mean, if anybody's going to do it, it'll be this group at Script, and this is what they do. But you know, it is a model ensemble. There's 10 different global climate models that, you know, are incredibly well tested and validated and compared. And so the one thing that they agreed on was that they didn't really necessarily agree on whether the future was going to be drier or wetter anywhere in particular. Southern California is its own thing. It's definitely going to be drier. Sorry, I believe so. But the one thing that they could say for sure was that this distribution of precipitation is going to be changing. And again, it's a atmospheric signal, not so much, you know, the topography is not changing,
right?
Things like that.
So there was an article that recently came out. I think I found it on earth.org. It's about the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, and that there was a fear that we could be reaching a tipping point which would reverse weather patterns. So are we seeing that on the, I remember there was a presentation related to some of the weather patterns changing related to the fires down in Australia. We're seeing now these fires that were in Washington or Canada. Now we're seeing them in Texas. So this is kind of an evolving thing in some ways, that between these patterns changing in the oceans, these fires impacting weather patterns, a lot of it's making it harder and harder to predict. Am I?
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, I think that the uncertainty going forward is huge, but it doesn't prevent us from doing something, because there's some patterns that are would be hard to reverse or see otherwise.
Right.
And one of them is, again, longer dry spells, longer wet spells, and not the in between.
Right. And you just said something that you thought that Southern California is going to be drier.
Every model I've seen points that.
Okay. And so because we're talking about the state water supply, what about the Colorado River? How is that impacted?
That's a good question. I really couldn't speak to it exactly, other than when I talk about Southern California, it's because it's part of that sort of New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California blob that is often highlighted in red as like the one confident part of the model for the U.S. in terms of getting drier.
I think it'd be good to widen our consideration, since it is a significant part of the water supply for the state. And if there's a difference, I think it'd be good for us to know. So
I agree.
Yeah.
I love that I get to look this up. So thank you, Councilmember Burgess.
I'm super curious, and I don't know what I'm talking about, so I can. Thank you.
Other questions?
And I just wanted to point out, I also agree that water injection is just the best way to manage water. But it seems that water that collected in aquifer that took thousands of years to collect, we found a way to extract it enormously in the last 100 years, and we haven't found the way to re-inject it in a way that maintains the levels. And that's going to be the strat. That's going to be, so with extreme rain events where you have enormous flows, how do you take all that water and inject it? So the concept of flooding fields makes sense, because you have time to allow the water to percolate. But these events, it just seems that the oldest concept to do that is to build reservoirs that help to capture that and slow it down from going directly into the ocean. Just that might be something that we have to strongly consider for our future.
Let me just chime in. Which is the way we do, and the way Native Americans did as well is create little dams, and there's a term for that called NIDS, natural infrastructure. In the D is like drought, or I can't remember, but arid systems basically. But I want to just plug the DWR program that actually is on managed aquifer recharge, which is they've got sites on the San Joaquin in particular, and a lot of money going towards that to do injection. So, I don't think it's fully operational at the level that would solve problems right now, but it is definitely an active program.
Excellent. Thank you. Great discussion. Great presentation, Lisa Marie. And, it's so interesting, because I don't know if it's just my experience, but the term atmospheric rivers, I don't think was used as much as it's being used now. Actually, it was one of the comments that came from one of the meteorologists, and they said, now we're using it, it's like it's been part of our, vernacular, and it seems like it wasn't, but and as I looked at that graph, it seems like that's why they're using it more and more, because the atmospheric rivers are the ones that are going to produce more rain, less snowpack. Is that correct?
Some of them make snow. It's a really timing situation, but in general, more of them are coming as rain. Yes.
Yeah. Right. All right. Well, thank you. We're 1 minute early, so I'm going to ask the council if you would like a 5-minute bio break before we start. Oh, before we do that, though, we have to take public comment. Is there any public comments on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay. Great, thank you. Can we take a 5-minute break? Is that okay? Sure. All right. We will be back at 3:05. I'd like to, oops. I'd like to, oh, I don't think it's working. I'd like to reconvene. Okay. I'd like to reconvene the, no, I don't think it's on.
Hello.
All right, we're gonna come back.
I'm testing. Okay, here we go. I'd like to reconvene the Delta Stewardship Council from our short break, and we are now back on item 8, and that is the Staten Island Wetland Restoration and Carbon Farming for Habitat, Climate, and Communities. And for that, we are going to bring up Jeff Henderson, our Deputy Executive Officer for Planning and Performance, and you will introduce our panel.
I certainly will. Good afternoon, council members. It's me again, Jeff Henderson. Thank you, Chair Medueno. This item is concerning the Staten Island Wetland Restoration and Carbon Farming for Habitat, Climate, and Communities Project, or Staten Island Project for short. The Delta Conservancy provided grant funding for this project to create a mosaic of managed wetlands in the Delta. The project itself is led by the Nature Conservancy. So we have the Delta Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy, not to be confused. The Delta Conservancy, as lead agency for the project, has determined that the project was exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, which we'll refer to as CEQA throughout the presentation, under the recently established statutory exemption for restoration projects, which we'll refer to as SERP throughout the presentation, finding that the project aligned with California's Cutting the Green Tape initiative and did not meet the council's regulatory definition of a covered action. Next slide, please. You may recall that we considered a similar project presentation concerning the Knightson Wetland Restoration Project at your August meeting last year. Today, I'm again joined by Pete McHugh, who is with us on Zoom from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, along with Rachel Wigginton from the Delta Conservancy and Isabella Gonzalez Potter from the Nature Conservancy. The panel will describe the Staten Island project, the SERP process, and its relationship to the Delta Plan. We're not seeking any council action at this time. So I would just also draw the connection back to Brandon's legislative report that there is a trailer bill that's been put forward that would extend this SERP provision permanently. It currently has a sunset date of 2025, but that would be extended permanently under the trailer bill. Okay. Before we dive in, next slide, please. I'll provide a little bit of background on the SERP process, which Pete will elaborate on in a moment. Under the process, the lead agency must first make its own independent determination that the statutory exemption would apply. Then it must seek concurrence from the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife that the project meets specific qualifying criteria that are set forth in the Public Resources Code. The director's concurrence must be based on substantial evidence and best available science, two concepts that also apply to the council's covered action process. And for those who are not deeply experienced with CEQA, a CEQA exemption essentially means that the project would not prepare an initial study, a mitigated neg deck, or an EIR as it otherwise would. CEQA includes a number of different types of exemptions. This one was added by the legislature in 2021 with the intent purpose of advancing the pace and scale of habitat restoration throughout California. The exemption status is an important part of determining on the council's part if the project is a covered action under the Delta Plan, as we'll describe a bit later. For now, I'll hand it off to Pete, Rachel, and Isabella, beginning with Pete, who is joining us via Zoom today.
Good afternoon. Next slide, please. All right. First off, thanks for having us back to talk about SERP, topic near and dear to our hearts at CDFW. I'm Pete McHugh. I'm the lead of the Bay Delta Regents Cutting the Green Tape team that helps administer the SERP exemption on our end. Next slide, please. And just a bit of background, our unit was created at similar timing to when the exemption went into existence to help accelerate the pace and scale of restoration in the state of California. We serve in a variety of capacities. I'm here to talk about the regulatory side today. We also support restoration projects through grant funding and project coordination. Next slide, please. And on the regulatory front, there are a number of different permitting tools that we help administer. Again, we're going to talk about SERP, or the statutory exemption for restoration projects today, but we do facilitate restoration permitting for State Endangered Species Act listed species through our restoration management permit or CISA consistency determinations that are linked to federal ESA approvals, as well as lake and streambed alteration permitting and CISA coverage through our Habitat Restoration and Enhancement Act approvals. Next slide, please. So what is SERP? Again, this came into existence late in 2021 as a CEQA exemption pathway through statute for restoration projects of any size. Prior to SERP, the main exemption pathway for restoration projects was relatively restrictive in size, a categorical exemption limited to projects less than 5 acres in size. The statute has a lifespan through January 1st of next year, 2025, and so it has roughly a little over a 3 and change year lifespan. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what has been accomplished thus far towards the end of this presentation. But now we'll focus on just sort of the mechanics and how it works. Essentially, there's a process involving the lead agency that is pursuing the project and the Department of Fish and Wildlife on a concurrence end of things. But first and foremost, the project must meet the characteristics of essentially a true restoration project that is aimed to improve habitat conditions for native fish and wildlife and or their habitat. So there are 4 criteria in the statute, and the first one, A, pictured in the slide, is linked to that requirement. The second is that a project may have incidental public benefits, such as public access and recreation. It's not required to, but having some incidental public benefits does not prohibit projects from using this exemption. Next slide, please. Additionally, to qualify for the exemption, projects need to include long-term benefits. So in the face of climate change, sea level rise, increased incidence of floods, atmospheric rivers, drought, the things we heard about in the scientist report a moment ago, and also include procedures for the ongoing management and protection of the environment. So this is things like avoidance and minimization measures during project implementation, but also perhaps site management activities, adaptive management that ensures the project will continue to offer benefits to fish and wildlife. And lastly, the exemption does not extend to projects that include construction activities unless those construction activities are somehow linked to facilitating the restoration itself. And so through this exemption, there's a process set up wherein the lead agency first determines independently that their project meets those 4 criteria, and then seeks our concurrence, our director's concurrence. Next slide. And how does this play out? So on the lead agency's end, we have a pre-consultation process. We typically meet with project leads and discuss the process, get a sort of a sneak preview of their project and what the intent is, and kind of describe our hopes and expectations through facilitating a SERP concurrence on our end. And one of those is that being an exemption, there are no requirements for outreach, stakeholder engagement, consultation, and engagement with Native American tribes. But we strongly encourage that through on our end to help ensure that projects are still doing good by those in the community and partners. The agency makes their initial determination, submits that request and all associated documentation to CDFW. And then upon receiving the concurrence, that lead agency pursues some sort of a discretionary action. And within 48 hours of that, they need to file their notice of exemption that is related to this SERP concurrence at that point. On the CDFW end, we review the lead agency's initial determination and all the associated documentation and help prepare a concurrence for the director to review, and those are eventually reviewed and posted on our website once approved. And in the Delta specifically, there are certain aspects that involve a little more legwork on the part of projects to the extent that we can encourage it. And one of those activities relates to just a sort of more enhanced level of engagement. And of course, engaging with the Delta Stewardship Council early on to ensure that the project is consistent with the Delta plan. On the sort of enhanced outreach front, we generally point folks to the Good Neighbor checklist of the Delta plan and encourage that they pursue that and submit any documentation demonstrating that they have, in fact, pursued those steps during their preparation. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we eventually post concurrences on our website. This is just a screenshot of our website and where they can be found. The URLs are in the bottom left there if you're interested. I will say go to the next slide and tell you a little bit about the stats of where we are with administering this exemption today. So as of late last week, statewide, 48 concurrences have been issued. That's 48 projects that have been exempted from CEQA through this pathway, resulting from 125 consultations and requests. 2 of those concurrences that have been issued are in the Delta. One we're here to talk to today. The other one being the Knightson Wetlands Restoration Project that we talked about last year. In total, the exemption pathway has facilitated the restoration of over 20,000 acres. So relatively large space. There's some pretty large scale projects that comprise a lot of that acreage. But there has also been a wide range of project types that have used the exemption pathway, ranging from wood addition projects for streams benefiting salmon to tidal marsh restoration to fuels projects, actually using exemption for upland enhancement as well. And one of the things we do after a concurrence is issued is administer a brief survey with lead agencies to get some sense of what using this pathway has done for them in terms of efficiency. And what we've learned from that is on average, project leads are saving about 7 months and a little over $100,000 in project savings in terms of CEQA compliance activities that would have otherwise occurred. And I think you can sort of compound that savings across other regulatory agencies that might have CEQA compliance work to do. They can now use this exemption as well, or maybe they would have historically been reviewing and commenting on mitigated neg decks or otherwise. And I would say that it's quite possible, it's largely speculative because we only have two to base this on at this point, but projects in the Delta being relatively large in size, more complicated CEQA process potentially, if they're able to use this exemption, could be quite a bigger savings for Delta projects. And that's the overview of SERP and where we're at today. With that, I will just pass it back to the panel. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman Dueño and council members. My name is Rachel Wigginton, and I'm a senior environmental scientist at the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. And I'm here today to very briefly review the role of the Delta Conservancy with the Staten Island Wetland Restoration Project as the CEQA lead agency and also the funder of final project planning and implementation. The Delta Conservancy, not to be confused with the Nature Conservancy, who's the project proponent, is a state agency with a service area covering the statutory Delta and Sassoon Marsh, which covers about 1,300 square miles and over 1,000 miles of levees and waterways. Now, as I said, the Delta Conservancy is the CEQA lead agency for this project. At the time of project funding, draft 65% design plans had been completed, and the Delta Conservancy was the only public agency taking a discretionary action on the project with its decision to fund final project implementation. The Delta Conservancy worked with the Nature Conservancy to fund this project through our Ecosystem Restoration and Climate Adaptation Grant Program via our Nature-Based Solutions Wetland Restoration Funding Source. Now, when TNC began consulting with the Delta Conservancy staff about the project, we quickly realized that the primary purpose of this project was habitat restoration, and that the project seemed to fit the other criteria laid out by the SERP statute. So we began consultation with CDFW's SERP team. Similar to the Nights and Restoration project you heard about last year, as part of the outreach process undertaken to support our SERP analysis, TNC received a letter of support from the Delta Counties Coalition, along with several other groups and outreach efforts, which you'll hear about in a little bit more detail in just a few moments. The project was approved by the Delta Conservancy Board for funding in October of 2023, and at that same board meeting, CEQA lead agency findings supporting staff's analysis that the project was exempt from CEQA under SERP were adopted. I'll now turn it over to TNC to give more details about this project.
After the clicker here. Good afternoon. My name is Isabela Gonzalez Potter. I'm the Associate Director of State External Affairs here at the California chapter of the Nature Conservancy. We're a big fan of conservancies, but we are not a part of the state. We are completely separate nonprofit, just working very closely with our colleagues at the Delta Conservancy. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about just the project in general, TNC's intentions with the project, as well as a lot of the stakeholder outreach that we conducted while working on the project. So first and foremost, we are the landowner and project lead. TNC owns Staten Island. We work very closely with our colleagues at Conservation Farms and Ranches, which is the preserve manager. And the design is being led by DU or Ducks Unlimited, with soil and water monitoring being led by Hydrofocus. And as was already articulated, we've received funding from both CDFW, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as our good friends at the Delta Conservancy. So just a little bit about Staten Island, that of course is located here in the Delta. It's about 9,200 acres, and it farms approximately 8 kilometers south of Walnut Grove, where we are here today, so very close by. The Nature Conservancy first acquired the property more than 20 years ago with the goal of advancing and implementing wildlife-friendly agricultural practices. In that time, we've worked to understand the science, economics, and land management actions needed to enhance and support high-quality habitat here in the Delta. So just a little bit about the project area itself. So Staten Island is outlined in white, and then the project area there is in blue. It really builds on the foundation that I've already described in TNC's intentions with owning Staten Island. As many of you already know, the Delta historically has been supportive of almost half of California's coastal wetlands habitats, but most of this habitat has been lost or modified for human uses, including agricultural production, urban development, and energy infrastructure. Additionally, like many other parts of the Delta, Staten Island is affected by land subsidence, which has already been discussed today. The project will help to recover some of the Delta's wetland functionality, and it involves restoring just under 1,000 acres of wetland on the southeast and most subsided portion of Staten Island. So, as I was saying right there in the southern part of the map. This wetland will provide substantial ecosystem benefits by providing both high-quality habitat, wildlife-friendly agriculture, and native plant cover.
We fundamentally see this project as a way to convert substandard farmland into an alternative use that addresses subsidence and provides critical habitat. So just a little bit more about the habitat benefits specifically for native species. Staten Island, and we'd welcome folks if anyone was interested in a tour, by the way. Incredible to see the cranes this time of year. It's an important location for Delta wildlife, especially birds, which we're known for. From the Swanson's hawk, the song sparrow, endangered Caspian tern, and greater and sandhill cranes have all been observed at the project site, along with a wide variety of other water birds. And the wetland will support these and other species with 3 different types of habitat areas. So the first being an area that is flooded for at least 6 months annually to provide roosting sites and food sources for migratory birds, such as sandhill cranes. The second being an area and a habitat that is flooded for at least 10 months annually and will support breeding shorebirds, waterfowl, and listed species. And then finally, the third habitat type that includes wildlife-friendly rice and is flooded 8 months out of the year to provide general enhancement for wildlife. The project will also restore aquatic habitat that could enhance phytoplankton production and drainage of wetlands into the outside channel, which will support the aquatic food web immediately outside of the island, where species such as Delta smelt, Chinook salmon, and steelhead have all been observed. And just some additional project benefits in addition to the habitat side of things. There are some great benefits, which include stopping and reversing ground subsidence, which occurs when rich peat soils are drained and exposed to air. As these soils oxidize, the ground subsides, putting stress on the levees and increasing flood risk, emitting greenhouse gases and making land too wet to farm in some places, which is a big challenge here in the Delta. By flooding these subsided land with wetland habitat, that oxidation process is essentially halted, and sediment is able to accumulate and build back up. Additionally, covering these soils with water means avoiding those GHG emissions that would occur from this process. It may also increase carbon sequestration. So we see these as co-benefits. And then just a little bit in terms of the phasing of this project and how it's going to work. The first phase is publicly funded, so the more northern part of this southern area, if you will. Planning for both phases is nearly complete and is being funded by a CDFW Prop 1 grant, the Delta Water Quality and Ecosystem Restoration Program grant, specifically. This work has included outreach, development of 65% of the engineering design that I think was already mentioned, and permitting for the project. After planning is complete in March, the first phase of implementing the project will begin. This phase will take place on 426 acres of the northern parcels of the project area and includes about 320 acres of semi-permanent wetlands and 106 acres of managed seasonal wetlands. This phase of the project is being publicly funded by the Delta Conservancy using funds from their Nature-Based Solutions Wetlands Restoration Funding Program. And then the second phase is actually privately funded. So that's something that TNC is undertaking. Staten Island has long served as a demonstration project for us and a living laboratory for wildlife and climate-friendly agriculture in the Delta. And one of TNC's top objectives for this project is to help scale and accelerate similar projects across the Delta in support of the state's biodiversity and climate goals. So really we're seeing this as a demonstration project, and hopefully we can replicate in other areas. As part of the project, we will be doing a comparative analysis of the 2 public and private project phases to help inform and support California's cutting the green tape and better understand barriers to this kind of restoration project. With this analysis, we hope to create broader impact beyond the project site. And then just wanted to take some time to talk about the outreach that's been done to date. There's already been a robust discussion today about the importance of tribal outreach, which is something that we agree with and take really seriously at the Nature Conservancy. From some of our colleagues, these were the 5 tribes that were recommended to us to reach out to, which we did and sent formal letters and invites to essentially do a tour of Staten Island so folks can see firsthand the work that is happening. We received responses from 2 of the 5 tribes and are currently working on setting up essentially field trips in the spring. Just between the holidays and the rain and internal staff turnover, it's taken a while, but we're excited about that once the weather is a little bit better.
And then just thinking about some of the local and community outreach that happened, we were working really closely with our colleagues from CFNR, California Farms and Ranches. And they have great relationships, of course, with the neighboring landowners. So a lot of that was sort of the traditional calling people that they already knew. We didn't receive any opposition or concerns about the project from any of those conversations with the neighboring landowners or just local farmers. And then in terms of the county and supervisor outreach, we worked really closely. My colleague, Mark Lee Babinger, who wasn't able to be here today, worked with the San Joaquin County Technical Advisory Committee, just educating county reps. We didn't have to do any formal presentation in terms of that Delta County Coalition, but we did meet with some of the supervisors and just receive support. And then I think in the background materials that were provided, you received all of the support letters that are listed here from various kind of environmental nonprofits, Metropolitan Water Agency, as well as, you know, smaller farming and other types of organizations. So we, of course, appreciate their support as well. And then just kind of a quick overview of the project timeline and next steps. Right now, we are in the process of completing the planning for both phase 1 and phase 2. And then in early 2025, that's when we'll be finalizing the design plans. And then from mid 2025 to 2027, that's when construction is going to happen. And then finally from 2024 to 2026 is that final phase of securing funding. And that's really it. So we're happy to take any questions and just appreciate the time to discuss the project today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Questions, we're going to start with Councilmember Burgess.
Less of a question, more of a statement. I'm a big fan of the SERP program. You know, I appreciate the explanation. We've seen it a couple times, and this is a good reason for us to be able to expedite things. It is expensive to do this, and the longer it takes to get through all of the things that you're getting to skip when you're doing SERP, gives you time to get to the project faster, and it's going to be less expensive. So the statement that it said unquantified additional savings is really, really true. So that's my statement.
That's great. Other questions?
I'll go, I have one.
Okay, Councilmember Lee.
In your graphic here where you show the pre-1880 freshwater tidal marsh, is that your hope for the project, is that it's going to look something like this when it's done? Or is it something different, a hybrid?
I'll confess that I am not the project lead. I'm subbing for my colleague, Dr. Sydney Chamberlain. So maybe somebody else wants to address that. I don't want to speak incorrectly, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you. I can speak to that a little bit. So as was stated, the area where the project is happening is one of the most deeply subsided areas at Staten Island. And so this is going to function more like a managed wetland just because of the ground subsidence. So it's not going to be able to be tidally connected, and the rate of accretion, so like recovery of elevation, is going to be very, very slow, even with the wetting of the land. So perhaps sometime in like the quite distant future, it might be functioning like that again. But our real hope for the near term is that we'll create functional habitat that can be used by species.
And this is going to sound like a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So how many other projects are you gearing up for? And obviously these are expensive. And where else in the Delta do we have other areas identified, or do we?
Just to clarify the question, do you mean for the SERP, or do you mean just for wetland restoration more generally?
For the SERP.
Oh, I'll throw that to Pete.
Yeah, Pete, if you have anything you wanted to add to this, that would be helpful too. One of the things I was going to point out is that we are aware of additional habitat restoration projects in the Delta, some of which, you know, many of which we're tracking on the active projects list that the council receives. Many of these projects may consider using the SERP exemption, and we need to carefully consider the facts and merits of each and every one of them individually on a case-by-case basis to figure out if an exempt project under CEQA presents unusual circumstances that would have us consider it to be a covered action. And so that's something that we're very aware of. I think this is an interesting balance between the council's authority to look carefully at these projects and ensure consistency with the Delta Plan and advancing the state's prerogative to move along toward cutting the green tape. So for that reason, each of these projects, one by one, we've got to consider the merits on each of them in order to figure out how best to advise the council. In this instance, the Conservancy reached a determination that it's not a covered action, and the staff has not identified unusual circumstances that would lead us to assert that it is.
And is it fair to say that staff is taking this very seriously because we want to be able to expedite those projects that this was provided for in that spirit without it being used as the loophole to help other things get through? Is that a
Absolutely.
Okay.
We're very aware of the consequence of not identifying one of these projects as a covered action. And for that reason, this example is a project that advances a number of the Delta Plan objectives. It's been thoroughly vetted with surrounding landowners, the counties, and others. They use the Good Neighbor checklist. There's a lot of these things that indicate this is a project headed in the right direction that would be consistent with the Delta Plan.
And that's why it's so important that with all these partners that it's my impression that everybody's taking this very seriously and trying to be the best actors possible. And just this morning, I got a text that said the Knightson project just got 9.7 million towards construction for that project. So I think it's inspiring to see everybody working together for the right reasons to get things built that are going to do good things. So.
And I guess it really boils down to, again, as you so eloquently stated, Jeff, it's that early consultation. It's, again, being able to work together and take a look at the merits of the project. And again, its effects on the Delta Plan and the co-equal goals and whatnot. So I'm reading your face, Jeff, in that it's a slippery slope here, very slippery slope. But I think that this particular project sounds like it's well positioned again and really meets the criteria in the very best way. So thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question, and I was wondering, and maybe the scientists could respond to this in the room. What is the difference between carbon farming and carbon sequestration, generally?
All right, I'll give it a go, and then my colleague Lauren Damon is here, who's actually the lead of our.
That's why I thought I said maybe the scientists in the room are.
But yeah, so I mean, carbon sequestration is the storage of carbon in the sediments or other materials like long term. And I think the idea of carbon farming has to do with like various different practices where carbon might be stored, but perhaps not like over the long term, but maybe over a shorter duration. And then potentially like pursuing things like polluticulture, where we have different products that are grown in like a wetland habitat situation. Yeah, that could absorb some of the carbon from the atmosphere and then perhaps be like transferred into some sort of agricultural product. I don't know if you have anything to add, Lauren, or.
I'm Lauren Damon, also from the Delta Conservancy, and I apologize. I wanted to be here earlier, but I was out at Staten Island actually. So I popped over as soon as I could. The only thing I would add and clarify is that carbon farming really is about the selling of carbon. So doing something intentional agricultural practices to be able to use the carbon to generate a revenue. So that, for example, carbon credits, like doing wetlands for the purposes of having carbon credits and selling that for a revenue stream.
But it's mostly agricultural solutions.
Well, wetlands would count as carbon farming. So yes, they're very closely related. There's like a thin line between agriculture and wetlands when you're talking about carbon farming. They become kind of one and the same.
I'll just jump in just.
Yes, that will help.
This is my little world too. And I actually agree with what Laura's saying. I mean, a lot of this is about palatability, and the term carbon farming implies a revenue for the carbon that's being sequestered. So if you're going to get a carbon credit on the market, it needs to be sequestered, or at least some evidence that it's out of the atmosphere and locked away. So, but the idea of calling it carbon farming to me is really about, it's a way that people can activate this process on land that's maybe, it could be polluted culture, it could be a wetland and so on. I had another question, was about hydroperiods, but I'll.
So one more, okay, they capture and then they use it for carbon credit.
Yeah, the plants are taking it out of the atmosphere, so that's a negative carbon emission, pulling out of the atmosphere, and theoretically adding it to the peat so that it's building up over time, or at least stopping the subsidence.
So a carbon producer activity would buy, let's say, this in order to get a credit for reduction of, or a credit. Okay.
Yes, that the market is based on a trade of emissions versus removals.
Got it. Okay, I think I'm clear now.
And I still have this question. Is that a stable income? You know what I mean? That's based on a value that's politically important now, but if things were to shift, could it lose its value? And if you're basing the maintenance and all of that on that, it concerns me.
That kind of
Concerns you because-
uncertainty is kind of the nature of farming in general, though, right?
It concerns you because it's done for commercial purposes, but takes a lot of credit for restoration of the nature. Is that the concern?
So in some projects, you've got farming and the carbon sequestration of the credits. And so if that income, that revenue is expected to be at this value for maintenance and repairs and whatever, to keep it neutral, and then that value goes down for whatever reason. I'm not an economist. I've asked this question before. You're the economist.
Scientist. She's a scientist.
But you're being paid for what got sequestered. So like it's like the proof is in the pudding. The carbon went in there. You did your job. It's in there. The question about value is usually permanence. How long is it going to be there?
Right.
And these wetlands have been there for thousands of years. 8,000 years is the age of the delta. So the potential is there. I mean, there is a risk into the future, agreed, of sea level rise and damage to levees and so on. But yeah, we can talk about this.
I could be up, but your point, Jessica, that farming is,
Yeah, I mean, look at almonds right
like,
now, for
I
example.
know, almonds.
Yeah, look at pears. So
Right. Yeah.
farmers have to deal with a lot of uncertainty.
And could it legislatively be at some point where the polluters or producers have to do things like this? I mean, who's the legislative expert? Right, you might.
If we're talking about carbon program, it's basically, it's every year they have like an auction where they sell credits, and there are people that are in the business that specialize in buying them and others that sell them. So the people that are selling them are the ones that actually, like, let's say you have a power plant that produces a lot of contamination, and they buy credits to offset their contamination.
Right.
And the people that, when they're basically buying the credits, that's puts the money in the system.
Sure.
And so it's an annual budget, and that's where the legislature comes in and decides we're going to spend this money on projects that offset.
But are they regulated to do that? I mean, are the people do that because of good of mankind, or they do it because they're regulated?
Well, they're regulated through a law that passed in 2006, AB 32, that established the carbon credit en banc and the system where if you're producing so many tons of contamination every year, and I think they evaluated it like $30 a ton or something to that effect.
Is that stable, that number, or does it increase? Or?
Well, some people decided that, like, for example, a lot of those emitters have gone out of business and replaced by solar power. They've been replaced by wind power. They've been replaced by energy, more efficient projects. So the program basically measures the highest polluters in the state and says, well, you have to pay for your emissions, and that's where the money comes from. And who receives the money is the ones that can make the best claim that they can do the most amount of carbon capture. And so if you have a project that will capture an enormous amount of carbon, you want to fund those projects if they're the most affordable. And generally, over the years, we've looked at funding, rebates for electric vehicles or projects that promote walking or projects that are actual carbon collection projects like tree plantings.
Yeah, which is like this project.
And so, yeah, I think generally people have come to the door knocking, saying we can do it better, we can help. And others have decided we're going to become less of an emitter and find ways to not pay into the system, right? By going clean. So it's working on both ends where some people decide it's just not profitable for us to run this business anymore. So we're going to go and provide energy through a cleaner or water, or I mean, the law is extended into even water districts. They have to show that they're taking steps to reduce their emissions and to fight climate change. So it's really extended across the state into all the different agencies that maybe, I mean, if you're a water district, you're going to be using an enormous amount of power, and you're going to have to show the state that you're working to offset that somehow, or taking steps to do it. Or, I mean, you run the risk of getting folded into being regulated by the program and being charged a fee for your emissions.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Great discussion. Thank you, what you did. All right, I will now ask if we have any public comment on this item.
Yes, Madam Chair, we have a public comment on Zoom from Gilbert Cosio.
Okay.
You should be able to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Gil.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Dueño and members of the council. Gilbert Cosio, River Delta Consulting. I don't know if I have a comment or a question. You guys can figure it out. First, I want to say the CERT process, I'm all for anything that cuts red tape. Even though a lot of my business over the years has been getting paid for dealing with red tape. The one comment I have, and maybe it's a question, was that I'm concerned when you raise the water surface on deeply subsided delta islands, that you could potentially raise the water table on neighboring islands. And that's been shown to happen when we've had levee breaches. And there's a really good study that was done after the Jones Tract breach in 2004. As they were dewatering Jones Tract, they had a lot of seepage on Woodward and Bacon and McDonald Islands that caused them not to be able to plant crops that year on certain parts of the island. And on McDonald, they actually had piezometers that measured the water surface in the ground as Jones Tract was being dewatered. And there's a very close relationship to the water level in Jones Tract and the water table on McDonald. And so these are hydraulically connected. You wouldn't think so because you got a big channel between, like in this case, we got the South Fork McKelvey, but there's so much sand under these channels that if you get enough head of water on one side, it does push it to the other side. And so I'm a little bit concerned that some of these projects could potentially raise the water table on neighboring islands. I'm familiar with Bolden, and I'm pretty confident Bolden's high enough on that end that it won't be a problem. I'm not familiar with Terminus Tract east of the project. but I am familiar with the Brack Track on the northeast, off the northeast corner of the project. And I know those are some of the lowest grounds on Brack Track, and they can't keep them dry enough to farm as it is right now. And so I'm a little bit concerned if the water table gets raised, that's going to render some of those properties unfarmable. So I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but did the project proponent look at that and establish that it wasn't going to happen, or what did they do? I know on the Delta Wetlands project, you know, they were going to have a water surface about -4 on the Delta Wetlands islands to store water in the Delta. And one of their biggest issues, which they had a lot of lawsuits they had to fight, was that this potential to seep water to other islands. And as a result of this mitigation, they were going to put interceptor wells on levees across the channel to intercept any water that was coming from some other islands. So that's the common question I have, is whether it's been looked at or considered that you could potentially raise the water surface and cause problems on neighboring islands. Thank you.
Thank you, Gil. Anybody want to try to?
I can speak that a little bit. Thank you so much for your comment, Gilbert. So it's interesting because this area of Staten Island has actually the landowners, so Conservation Farms and Ranches, as was mentioned, is the land manager of Staten Island, and they're really involved in a lot of this farming, but also the habitat enhancement specifically for birds that goes on the whole of the island. And so in previous years, this area of the island where the wetland restoration is going to happen has actually been flooded, and there was wetland vegetation growing there. It wasn't a formal wetland restoration. This was more of a sort of the walking wetlands approach, where it was a part of the crop rotation that the area was flooded and some wetland vegetation recruited in. So this is a little bit anecdotal, but I will say that this has happened at this part of the site before. And in the conversations and the outreach that the project proponents did with the neighboring landowners, it definitely wasn't something that came up like, hey, last time you flooded this, that really messed up our water in our area. But I think that this is a really valid point and an important concern. And so I feel as though, keeping it in mind and making sure we're reaching out to those neighboring landowners as we continue outreach on the project is really important. So definitely appreciate the comment. I don't know if anyone else on the panel wants to speak to that.
I don't really have anything to add, but I would just emphasize, like I said, and like she was just articulating, that in all of the outreach that we did do to the neighboring landowners, there were no major concerns. As she was articulating, we've seen similar things happen before, so it's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. But yeah, we've informed the neighboring landowners of this project.
Great, thank you. Are there any other public comments?
No, Madam Chair, there are not.
Okay, thank you, Rachel, Lauren, Isabella. Thank you very much. And we will now move on, and Jeff, of course. Move on to item 9, California Department of Water Resources Delta Conveyance Update. And for that, we have Carrie Buckman from the Department of Water Resources. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you, Chair Medueno and members of the council. I'm glad to be back for a regular update. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about just general updates on where we are on the permitting process. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the comments received from the council on our draft EIR and just very generally how we address them in the final. This is something that had come up during some of our presentations last year, and I just wanted to touch base back in on those comments. Just also quickly before I jump in, I wanted to mention that one of the things we're doing this year, similar to past years, is that we are regularly calculating if the Delta Conveyance Project was in place this year, would we have been able to use it? And so we have calculated this year. We would not have been able to use it at the beginning of the water year in 2023, October, November, December. But starting in January, we would have been able to capture water. So if we had been able to use the Delta Conveyance Project this year, we would have captured about 481,000 acre feet as of last Thursday, the 22nd. And that's enough water to supply about 5 million people for a year, or nearly 1.7 million households for a year. So that is a substantial amount of water that would have been able to be captured this year if the project wasn't in place. And we're updating that about weekly up on our website if people are interested. Next slide, please. So one of the main activities that we're starting this year is that we are seeking a change in point of diversion for our water rights. We hold water rights to water in the South Delta currently. And in order to implement the Delta Conveyance Project, we need to amend that existing water right to add 2 new intake points to our water right. We are not changing the maximum volume of water that would be diverted. We're just adding 2 points where we could divert at the 2 intakes just north and south of Hood. Next slide, please. So we submitted our petition on February 22nd to the Water Board. And I have breaking news because during this meeting, they actually went ahead and noticed the petition. So that is news that I didn't have when I arrived today. So they have noticed the petition. What that means is that they've explained the process that they'll go through as part of this and how to protest the petition. So any protests are supposed to be submitted to the state board and copied to DWR by April 29th. So we sent out an e-blast and there's quite a bit more information on the state board's website for people who are interested. So what we will do now is that we will be working to collaborate with any protestants to try to resolve protests before we start a hearing if possible. And we anticipate that the state board will begin that hearing process in late 2024. So that is a public process for the state board to hear both from DWR about why we think that this change would not affect other users of water, and then also from protestants about their concerns. And then they will use that information to issue a decision and to create a new order. Next slide, please. Another focus this year is that we're working on the Endangered Species Act and California Endangered Species Act compliance. We've been having informal consultation with these agencies for quite some time, but we are moving this year into a formal consultation process. So we are working now to develop the documents that we submit to initiate formal consultation. So on the federal side, that document is a biological assessment. And on the state side, it's an incidental take permit application, or ITPA, on our slides. And so we've been working on talking to the fishery agencies so that when we submit these documents, they have what the agencies need and what they'll be looking for as part of this process. So we're planning to submit the documents and initiate formal consultation this spring. On the federal side, we do have 2 processes, one for construction that will be led by the Corps, and one for operations that will be led by reclamation. That operations is just at a program level, so it's less detailed. The idea is that we aren't proposing to begin operations for quite some time. We expect there to be a lot more information, changes in species understanding by the time that we start operations. So the programmatic consultation will set out a framework within which a project would need to operate, but we would need to do a project-specific consultation before beginning operations in the future. So we then expect to have the ITP and biological opinions completed in the fall of this year, and continue ongoing coordination with other projects like long-term operations. Okay, next slide, please. So I wanted to provide a little bit more information on how this all schedules out over the course of this year. So as you can see on the slide, there are some things that are already in the past on this slide. So we did release a statewide state water project economic study at the end of last year. That was not a Delta Conveyance project related thing. It was a DWR thing, but we've had it on here just because it's somewhat related to the kinds of things that we're working on this year, the need for securing the future of the state water project. Then we finished the final EIR and notice of determination at the end of 2023. And so moving into this year, we submitted our change in point of diversion petition, and that was just noticed to really formally begin the process to move that petition forward. And then some of the next key milestones are coming in Q2. So we are planning to release an updated cost estimate and a benefit cost analysis for that updated cost estimate. And that will come later this year before the end of Q2. After that point, we'll be conducting additional community benefit program workshops. So I think people remember we've talked quite a bit about the community benefits program, and the EIR included a framework for that program, but there's a lot that we still need to flesh out, and we want to do that in coordination with the community. So we'll have several workshops to talk about next steps, the kinds of information that we want to include in that next step document. So we're sort of fleshing out that framework and moving the program forward. Then we anticipate that ESA and CISA will be complete in Q3, along with the final environmental impact statement. And the water rights hearing can begin after ESA and CISA are complete. So we expect it to begin later this year. One other deliverable on here is the preferred project engineers report. And that is a deliverable. I'm not sure if people have really looked at the DCA's detailed designs on the project, but because the Bethany alternative was not the original proposed project that we submitted in our NOP, the details of the Bethany alternative are sort of spread across multiple reports. And now that we have selected that as a project to move forward, we want to have it all consolidated in one document. So that would be in the preferred project engineers report later this year. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're moving into a bit more about the EIR. So I'm realizing as we're talking, in my mind, it feels like the EIR was finalized so long ago, but I'm not sure we've actually talked since then. So the EIR was finalized in December. So we finalized the EIR on December 8th, and then we certified it on December 22nd. So the EIR included 2 volumes, a first volume that was the same content as the draft, but updated as we responded to comments. And then the second volume was the full set of responses to comments. And that included 2 main components. One was a set of common responses, and then one was individual responses where we replied to each individual comment that was submitted. And the common responses really reflect key themes that we saw in the comments. So that's part of the reason I wanted to include that here. There were things that we saw on a regular basis in many comments across many commenters. And if you click to the next slide, this will just bold the common responses that are related to the DSC's comments. There we go. Thank you. So common response 1, which was about the CEQA process and our approach to analysis. Number 2 was public outreach activities. 3 was alternatives development and description. Number 7 is implementation considerations. 8, relationship to other plans, projects, policies, and programs. 9, hydrologic modeling and approach. 11 is terrestrial biological resources and compensatory mitigation plan. 13, about recreation, and 16, tribal cultural resources. So these were, you can see that a lot of the comments that were made by your entity were similar to things and themes that we heard from others as well. And so I'm going to launch into a little bit more, actually we can go ahead to the next slide, a little bit more about some of the comments received. So the DSC organized the comments according to Delta Plan policies. And so these are the policies that were discussed. And I wanted to just mention here before we talk about them in more detail that I think almost all of our responses included something like, we appreciate this and we're looking forward to talking about it further in early consultation. I think a lot of the ideas here were to help us prepare for eventual consultation, but they weren't always directly related to CEQA. So some of the responses indicated, this isn't really a CEQA comment, but we definitely want to work with you to address, and we are planning to continue that early consultation. So we can move on to the next slide. So I'm going to walk through briefly some of the key things. This is not comprehensive. There are many pages of DSC comments. So we can certainly, if there are any things to dive into in more detail, we can do that. But just a general overview of how we responded to the comments, starting with GP1, the co-equal goals. And the comment, the way that I organize this is that I have the comment summary first and then sub-bullets that talk about how we responded to those comments. So with the co-equal goals, the comment was that if a determination is made, if DWR determines that consistency with the policy is not feasible, we need to identify that policy, why consistency is feasible, and how the project is nevertheless consistent with the co-equal goals. And we should consider analyzing and documenting the potential positive and negative impact on the co-equal goals. And this is something that we're planning through our ongoing consultation to continue to discuss. GP1 mitigation measures. So just as a little reminder, in case people haven't spent as much time with the old policy or the old way of looking at policies for water fixes as I've been looking at, in the Delta Plan, there are lists of mitigation measures to include. And what the water fix approach was, and we're sort of looking at a similar one, was to identify how the mitigation measures that we proposed are as good or improvements on what's in the Delta plan. So really trying to look at a one-to-one parallel comparison. So the comment was that the DSC identified a number of mitigation measures for which they asked for clarification on the potential impact or the applicable equal or more effective DCP mitigation measure, just to make sure that roadmap and connection is really clear. So we made a number of clarifications to help clarify those connections. We clarified when dewatering is proposed to occur and when groundwater monitoring would be required. We clarified how agricultural activities were considered in preliminary design, and that we would use the Good Neighbor checklist in planning and design of restoration sites. We clarified DCP mitigation measures for the aesthetics chapter, AES 1A through 1C, and that includes a commitment to a landscaping plan. We added clarification in the final EIR on the compensatory mitigation program, performance standards, and monitoring to explicitly describe monitoring and mitigation of seepage and nuisance water onto adjacent lands from tidal mitigation wetland. And we added clarification on the timing of additional technical studies to support design and planning. Next slide, please. So GP1 for best available science, there were comments on the materials and technical analyses considered in the impact analyses to determine if they are. I'm sorry?
Do you have a cost estimate at this time?
We do not. We are working on it. So we were waiting for the cost estimate until we had a proposed project. So now that we have identified the Bethany Reservoir alternative, we are working to revise that cost estimate, and we are planning to release that in Q2. So May, June timeframe.
I'm asking you, as you indicated that you were going to have a cost estimate, but it's not quite ready yet.
That's it.
Telling me?
Yep. And
So
so
we'll be ready the next, what do you think, next couple of weeks?
next couple of months, we still need some time to finish it. So we're working on it now.
A couple of months?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think in my mind about whether I think the next time I come for a quarterly meeting, we'll have it, and maybe the best idea is to time it so that we do. I'm not sure if that would be, we'll have to check in with your calendar to see if that works.
So the benefit analysis and the updated cost estimate, none of those were available today.
No, they're coming out together. They're a paired set of deliverables because we wanted to look at them both together.
Clarifying on the judge's question, is the cost estimate also how it's going to get paid for, or is it just how much it's going to cost?
So it's just how much it's going to cost. We do have some documentation on how it's going to be paid for. Generally, the idea that this would be paid for in the same way other state water project improvements are paid for, where we would issue revenue bonds that would be repaid by those who receive water from the project. So it would not have any obligation on the general fund at all.
Okay, so so the water providers would be expected to carry those bonds.
Yes, and that's the same. DWR would issue the bonds, but they would be repaid by the state water project contractors that receive water. And that's the way that we do improvements now, like major improvements to the state water project. So they are just explicit to the state water project. They do not have the ability to be repaid from the general fund.
And so those contractors would basically see this cost estimate and then make an agreement?
So they won't make an agreement yet. So the decision about whether to participate in the project won't come until after Delta Plan consistency, because really they want to know that the project can move forward before making that decision. So we're looking at the permitting that we're planning between now and Delta Plan consistency as being information they need to make that decision, but they would need to act to assume that debt, yes.
And is DWR looking at any other types of partners as far as the funding goes?
Not right now, no.
Okay. And how much is this costing?
Well,
is this, I mean, just to get to that point, how much is the state spending on the planning and all of the things that we're doing. Is there a number available?
There is, but I don't have it at my fingertips. We can certainly follow up.
All right, thank you.
No problem. I was looking back and seeing if we should stay on this slide, or I think we're still on this slide. So
I think I have one more before you move on. You talked about the ability to issue bonds, and are the users also, I mean, in terms of the structure of the financing of this thing, would the users also be able to issue bonds? Let's say if Metropolitan Water District is a big user, do they have to or can? Has that been ever discussed so far?
So because this would be a state water project facility, the way that we've been looking at it is that DWR would issue those bonds and the state water contractors would pay for them. But I guess I haven't explored the option of whether they
just came
could
to
fund it that way. It's just not the
Yeah.
financing plan
Yeah,
that we're.
the reason I'm asking is because if there are impediments in certain agencies to get it, then certain agencies have already that ability to do so. So, it's kind of an alternative mechanism to help move things at some point, maybe. But I'm just asking, I was not sure if you did, yeah.
Okay. Slides again. I feel like it's very anticlimactic to go back to slides after discussion. So hopefully people stay with me. Okay, so a few more comments to walk through. Best available science, there were a lot of questions and comments about the materials that we used, and so we provided some clarifications on methods for impact analyses. For GP1 adaptive management, the comment was that an adaptive management plan should outline potential uncertainties related to project effects, scientific basis for addressing those uncertainties, the programmatic structure for integrating monitoring results into the management process, and a clear statement of how adaptive management of project operations will be staffed and funded. And we provided clarification on the operations, adaptive management, and monitoring plan that is part of the project description, and integration of the adaptive management concept in mitigation, planning, design, and some construction-specific mitigation measures. For WRP1, reduced reliance on the Delta through improved regional water self-reliance, the comment was that DWR should list each urban and agricultural water supplier that would receive water as a result of the project, include quantifiable data documenting reduced reliance as described by this policy, analyze reduced reliance under different alternatives and export scenarios. And this is one where we really want to make sure we continue to have ongoing consultation, which we really appreciate that the boards or the council staff are working with us on. And just a note, because this was something in the comments, that reclamation or CVP contractor or contractors have not expressed interest in participating in the Delta Conveyance Project as project proponents. So we are not considering them as entities that would receive water.
You're saying that Bureau of Reclamation is not currently expected to be a partner on this?
They are not. They have not indicated interest.
Because I've heard that that was one of the things that DWR was interested in.
I think that over time there has always been interest. I think that the most recent discussion was whether it might make sense for reclamation to participate in CPOD, because there might be some potential in the future for wheeling or transfers, even though they're not a project proponent in the tunnel, but they opted not to do that. So that's not the case.
Are there any other federal water contractors?
They're not.
Okay.
I guess I should mention one exception. We do have a settlement agreement with Contra Costa Water District. I don't think of that as a project proponent, so that's why I said no. But we do have a settlement agreement where they would not challenge the EIR or protest under CPOD. And because of the potential, there's a disagreement about the potential water quality effects to Contra Costa. So we do have a settlement where we are working with them to build an interconnection to the tunnel that they could use to move their water supply during times that the water quality is better at our intake than at theirs.
Clarifying question, if I may, Chair. But so
absolutely,
even if the federal partners and CVP contractors don't end up being quote unquote proponents, they still could receive water from the project eventually, correct?
So I think the would versus could is something that we continue to discuss with staff. I think that we've been looking at it as those that would receive water, not those that could. And so I think that there's still something that we need to talk about there. Okay, I think we can move to the next slide. Just a couple more. Okay. WRP2, which is transparency in water contracting. The comment is that contracting should be done according to the guidelines identified in the policy, and DWR should consider the inclusion of language recommended in WRR2 about language included in contracts. And so this is one that we will continue through ongoing consultation. But just a clarification that we are legally required to follow the guidelines in the policy, and there are no CVP contract amendments that are identified as part of the project. So just back to that topic again. For ERP1, Delta flow objectives, if specific changes are made to the relevant flow objectives, the future certification should document the project's ability to meet specific requirements of the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan as it exists at the time. So sort of a summary, the Water Quality Control Plan update is underway, and if there are changes, then that should be considered. And we have clarification on the modeling results in the final EIR. We do have some modeling of what Delta conveyance would look like on an alternate regulatory baseline. We will have to comply with the applicable water quality control plan. We do understand that might change over time, not just this current update, but continue to change. Next slide, please. ERP2, restore habitats at appropriate elevations. The comment requested more detail on the proposed restoration approaches and property ownership. And so we did provide clarification on how the compensatory mitigation program considered elevation and clarification that there are no legal prohibitions to using the initial mitigation sites for Delta Conveyance Project compensatory mitigation. For ERP3, protect opportunities to restore habitat. The comment expressed concern that all three proposed alignments, the Bethany, Central, and Eastern alignments, traverse one or more priority habitat restoration areas. So the certification should consider whether the potential construction and operation of the proposed facilities would result in significant adverse impacts on the opportunity to restore habitat in PHRAs. So we did provide some clarification on the project activities in the PHRAs. Just to clarify, with the Bethany alternative, there is only one surface facility that does occur within a PHRA, and it's a pretty small facility. It's a tunnel shaft. It's 11 acres. So relative to the other sites, it's a pretty small area, and that parcel is currently in ag land. And then ERP4, expand floodplains and riparian habitats and levee projects. There was a request for more detail on the consideration of levee alternatives. And so we did clarify the levee improvement for each CEQA alternative. So we do have some levee improvements included in each of the alternatives. They vary by alternative. For example, Bethany doesn't include the improvements on Bolden Island that are included in the central alternative. But our point is not to really make broad scale flood improvements. It's just to sort of bolster areas that we will be working so that we keep people safe in the area that we're working. Next slide, please. Last one, we're almost there. ERP5, avoid introductions of habitat improvements for invasive non-native species. So the comment is that DWR should provide additional detail if available, especially if mitigation sites are identified, including analysis of how the project will avoid or mitigate introductions or improved habitat conditions for non-native invasive species. And so we do have commitments in the EIR related to invasive species, so we provided clarification on those. And then DPP2, respect local land use when siting water or flood facilities or restoring habitat. There were a number of requests here, including requests for information on the Delta Community Fund funding mechanism and funding amount, recommendation for CHAB sensitivity analysis, consider the loss of existing recreational opportunities, questions on how noise, air quality, environmental justice, and tribal cultural resources impact analyses were conducted or how mitigation will be implemented. So we did provide clarifications on those within the responses, and we are planning on having ongoing consultation on these as well. So that, I think, brings us to the end. I know that there have been some questions. We can move to the next slide. It's just a question slide. I know we've been doing questions as we've gone on, but if there are any more, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Are there any other questions? Yes. Councilmember Lee?
You had mentioned some of the answers were a little bit different during the water fix submission than they are for conveyance. Now that you guys have decided on the Bethany alternative, can you just give a high-level overview of some of the differences between the Bethany alternative and water fix and how those changes impact the Delta?
Yeah, there are a lot of differences. I could go on for quite some time. I mean, I think that the really initial obvious ones are that we're looking at 1 tunnel versus 2 and 2 intakes versus 3 with a smaller capacity. And then similarly, the ideas about the alignment, that we're looking at an alignment closer to I-5, which helps reduce logistics related impacts in the Delta. Getting to and from those sites is really something that causes a lot of impacts to the community and the environment. So keeping closer to I-5 is helpful. And then in the south end, the Bethany Reservoir alignment connects directly into Bethany Reservoir as opposed to having the large southern forebay. So that's another really major change from a land use perspective. There are some things that might not be as immediately apparent, but we think are also really important. Like, for example, any areas that we are near potential greater sandhill crane populations, we are undergrounding power lines to avoid bird strikes. We're managing traffic and logistics differently to try to keep the traffic down in areas of the communities that could be affected. And that means we are not allowing any construction related traffic on Highway 160 unless people live on Highway 160 and need to travel on it to get to their home. But we're having access roads that are going to provide access on the back sides of intake construction. We're going to have service roads to help avoid traffic on existing roads. We're working to try to reduce noise through a mitigation plan where we first sort of reduce noise through shrouds and then do improvements to homes and other businesses nearby. So I think there are a number of ways that we've been trying to reduce those effects, and I could go on at length, but that's sort of the quick summary.
Can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
You had mentioned that if the project had been in place, that you could have diverted an additional 481,000 acre feet of water. What does that mean? And just to help me educate me, in terms of like the total amount of water that goes through the project in a percentage, like is that like 50% or is it 5%? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it would roughly, I think people probably talk a lot about state water project allocations. I think you probably saw that last week, I think the allocation was declared to be 15% for the year. This is, I think, roughly probably about a 10% allocation. So it would have increased from about 15 to 25%. The state water project overall, the table A, I think is 4.1 million acre feet. I might be wrong about that, but I'd say in recent history, south of Delta deliveries average about 2.4 million acre feet. So this is a pretty significant amount of water related to that.
Other questions?
I had a follow-up
yes.
on that.
Councilmember Zingali.
Thank you, Virginia. I had a follow-up on that. Carrie, I was just curious, that 481 acre feet of water, where did it go? And was it of any use to any of our state goals in the way that it was, did it all flow out to the ocean or what happened?
It did all flow out to the ocean. There's certainly value in Delta outflow, but these are at times where there's been pretty high Delta outflow, but we've had pretty limited ability to capture water at the South Delta this year, particularly in February.
So were the benefits of that outflow kind of minimal because the flow was so large, or?
I think generally, and this is a very general statement, that as the flows get higher, the needs of the environment are more often met. So sort of a smaller percentage of that flow doesn't provide necessarily a huge environmental benefit, although certainly others could weigh in on that as well.
Thank you, and thanks for the really enlightening answers to Julie's other question about ways the plan has been modified. I didn't know about the I-5 alignment. That sounds like a huge positive development. So thanks for all that.
Councilmember Burgess.
Thank you. So what is the timeline for the change in point diversion? Is there like a kind of a deadline that things need to be done by, or how long is this process expected?
So that is at the discretion of the state board. So
Okay.
we are hoping that we will be able to start the hearing around at the end of the year. And our understanding is that it will, like, I'm estimating, I think it will take about a year. We're hoping it will be shorter, but I'd say 9 months to a year to finish the hearing.
So the hearing would start in the summer.
So
Is that what I
I'm
thought?
hoping the hearing will start at the end of this year. So
Okay.
November-ish.
So
of
it's
this year.
it'd start at the end of this year,
Mhm.
and then it could take up to another year or more.
It could be less, it could be
Or
more.
less,
It
right.
depends. I mean, we're doing everything we can to try to help resolve protests and keep things moving efficiently as part of that process.
And was that a part of the previous iteration that that was about the same kind of timeline? Or was that
So,
even an issue? 'Cause that wasn't-
California Water Fix was about 2.5 years,
Uh-huh.
and I will say that didn't finish. So that was the hearing that was, it did not conclude because
Okay.
Water Fix was rescinded.
Okay.
We've done a lot, though, to try to make that more efficient. I think that we recognize things like we want to have ESA and CISA complete before we start. They weren't the last time. CEQA wasn't complete before that process started. So they ended up having to split the hearing into 2 parts, and that was very difficult to manage. The state board now has an administrative hearings office that it did not have last time. So there are a lot of things I think this time that will make that more efficient.
So this point of diversion petition, will you wait till that's done before you come to us to certify?
Our plan is to wait until the hearing is complete before we
Okay.
come to you.
So we're looking at a couple of years still before it comes before us?
I think the earliest that we're looking at would be mid to late 2025, yes.
Okay. And so what you put down was all the consultations, I guess when we're talking with staff, the way you characterize it, I'll be asking, is that how you would characterize it? Because, I want to make sure what we're asking of you is actually, but when you're doing consultations, I don't know, I want to make sure that what you're providing to us is satisfying the clarifications and all of that. So I just would let you know that I'm interested in making sure that those things are being satisfied to our staff.
Yeah, I just want to clarify on that last question that you asked if they would, I think, complete the process with the water board before they would file with us. And
Right.
her answer was that they would complete the hearings. So the water board won't have yet issued its decisions or determinations.
So we wouldn't have those
No.
before it comes to us.
Not on that timeline. No.
And is that something that we would normally, is that what staff is
Something we have
asking for?
recommended
That's
in our
what we've
comment letters,
recommended?
that they finish that process first.
And so, but you're gonna go forward
I
without,
think we'll see how everything proceeds in terms of timing, but we really do have it really firmly at the front of our minds how important this project is. And so we're trying to do what we can to keep the permitting moving. And so we'll have to make that decision as it gets closer.
and it's kind of asking, but maybe the next update, maybe helping us and helping those of us understand why that was a recommendation might be a good.
It's a regulation in the Delta plan that, and so the way we interpreted it is that they need to have that permit in hand.
Okay.
And that was a subject of interest and contention in the water fix filings as well. So I know Carrie's well versed in those back and forths.
Okay. And so then I asked you questions about the funding. You said it would be water contractor. You would do the bonds, but it would be the water contractors that would pay for it. And again, they wouldn't have to go to that agreement until everything is kind of packaged and bowed for them.
I think I think so, packaged in both.
Yeah, it's hard to like, everything's all put together.
Yeah, I think that the way we're looking at it is that we need to get through the key permits in order for the agencies to feel comfortable that there is a project and understand what they're committing to. And so for us, those key permits are getting through CEQA, DSC and CISA, water rights, and Delta Plan consistency.
And I'm just curious, it said in 2022, they said that this project would cost about 16 billion.
It was in 2020, I think. Yeah.
Okay. I Googled it, Google's not always right. So what if this is so expensive that the water contractors can't pay for it?
So that's a decision they will all be making based on their own portfolios. In the past, State Water Project is some of the least expensive supplies. Developing other supplies are also very expensive. So I think that they will need to look at their portfolios and their options and make that decision on their own.
Okay. And then the EIR was put out right after Christmas?
Right before.
Right before Christmas. Did you give them extra time because of all the holidays to do their comments, or?
So the final EIR doesn't have a comment period associated with it. So we had a short period for public agencies to just take a look at their comments as required by CEQA. That's established as 10 days.
Wow. So that's kind of unfair.
Well, it's really not a comment period. So that's not the way that the CEQA process is worded. So it's a little bit different purpose. So we followed the way that was established, really keeping in mind that we had commitments to release that document at the end of the year, and we were.
So they had 10 days and a week between holidays. Okay. And then the last question I have is community benefit updates. I know we were talking about it, and as you were talking about it, the question was, you guys are, getting input. Things have changed so much, and things will change before this would actually start to be constructed. Are you incorporating that kind of idea into? Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that's part of what we're trying to build. It's something that is both flexible and also, I mean, we want it to be flexible enough that it can adapt to those kinds of changes, but also make sure that there is certainty that it will produce benefits.
Right.
So,
And
yeah.
for the dollar amounts, is that, does that account for the time and change? So in other words, I don't know what the budget is for that. Is it a percentage? Is it a certain amount of money? What is the community benefit budget?
So we haven't established the budget yet, but we will have that in the cost estimate that will be coming out. So we can talk about it more then.
Carrie, you're good at this, and I appreciate, you handle yourself very well. I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
I appreciate all the interaction. Thank you.
Just one thing on that topic, just for your awareness, the Delta Independent Science Board has decided that they are going to respond or analyze or review the response to comments for the letter that they sent on the EIR, even though there is no comment period. It won't be a formal CEQA comment letter. It will just be kind of a letter for public information, I suppose.
I had that on my list of questions. Will the Independent Science Board comments come before us?
They did last time. It was a letter sent, I believe, to the department and the council.
Okay. Thanks.
One question. When you calculated the capturing of the water, I was just wondering, how would that conclusion come to? Is it because of capacity, extra capacity? Is it because capture basins? I mean, how do you calculate that? And I'm happy to hear, because there are very, significant numbers, and
Yeah, so we look at a variety of things. The first is the criteria that we have in the EIR for when we can divert water. So there are a number of things. The main one is the bypass flow requirements. There has to be a certain amount of water flowing past the project on the Sacramento River before we can start diverting, and then the percentage that we can divert sort of expands as the river flows get higher. So essentially, we look at the flow in the river and determine how much we can divert. There are some additional restrictions layered on that for post protection events, and then screen criteria. So we look at those criteria to determine how much could be diverted. It also depends on criteria for other regulations and requirements in the Delta. So if D1641 has water quality requirements in effect that require a certain amount of outflow, we certainly can't divert that. So we look at our criteria, other criteria in the Delta, and other conditions in the state water project. So for example, we did this exercise last year as well, and from March on, we weren't able to divert any water because there was nowhere to put it. You know, conditions last year were so extraordinarily wet, especially on the San Joaquin River, that we were able to divert quite a bit at the South Delta. And so there really wasn't demand for any more diversions at the North Delta. There was no storage, there was no demand for that water. So we look at that as well to determine if there's a way to take the water.
Basically, the diversion flow, or that's the most important. Thank you. That's all my question. Great. We will now take public comment.
There is
I'm sorry, real quick. Daniel, your hand is up. Is that from the last time, or did you have another question?
Sorry about that. I'm still up from the last question.
Oh, okay, excellent.
Thanks
All
for
right.
checking.
All right. Do we have any public comment on this item?
no, Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Carrie. As always, we really appreciate, yes, I really appreciate the engagement and the opportunity to have very candid, ask very candid questions. That takes us to the conclusion of our meeting. We now have preparation for our next council meeting, which will actually take place tomorrow, March 1st, right here at the Gene Harvey Center in Walnut Grove. Please refer to the posted meeting notice for further information or updates. And hopefully I do not implode. I will now adjourn this meeting and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Good evening.